Hey there, tonight we're uncovering what Christmas was really like in a medieval monastery, where the flicker of candlelight and the echo of chants replaced the jingle of sleigh bells. What you're about to discover is a blend of sacred rituals and simple joys, far from the festive frenzy of today. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in, maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. You're jolted awake by the clanging of bells that make your average alarm clock sound like a lullaby. Welcome to life in a medieval monastery, where the day starts not with a cozy snooze button, but with matins at the unholy hour of 2 a.m. Yep, while most people are dreaming of dragons or dreading the next Viking raid, you're already up and at M, ready to embark on a day as regimented as a military drill. As you shuffle through the chilly stone corridors, barely awake, you might wonder why anyone would subject themselves to such a routine. Well, in the grand tapestry of medieval life, monasteries were the ultimate multitaskers. They weren't just about chanting and incense. These places were the Swiss Army knives of the medieval world, spiritual havens, educational institutions, and economic powerhouses rolled into one. If you were a monk, you were part of an elite squad running what amounted to a religious corporation. Picture this. The monastery isn't just a cluster of buildings where monks ponder the divine. It's also a financial juggernaut. Forget your local credit union. Monasteries were often the go-to place for a loan or a safe deposit. They managed vast estates and lands, acting as landlords to serfs who worked the fields. Talk about having multiple revenue streams. Modern influencers could take notes. The rules governing your day in the monastery are as precise as an atomic clock. The Benedictine rule, the most popular monastic code, is your guide. It dictates everything from when you pray to how much you eat. Spoiler alert, it's not much. Breakfast, maybe a slice of bread and a bit of ale if you're lucky. Lunch, or dinner in medieval parlance, is your main meal, and supper is more of a snack than a feast. And if you're thinking of sneaking a midnight snack, think again. Gluttony is a sin, after all. But why such an early start? Matins, the first of 8 canonical hours, is designed to get you in the spiritual zone. The idea is to be awake and alert, ready to greet the dawn with prayer. While the rest of the world is wrapped in darkness and silence, your day kicks off with spiritual discipline. It's a reminder that your life is dedicated to something greater than yourself. You're not just living for the here and now, but for the eternal. Economically, monasteries were the medieval version of Silicon Valley startups, innovative and influential. They held power not just through spiritual leadership, but through tangible assets. They owned land, collected tithes, and even leased property. Some monasteries, like Cluny in France, had control over hundreds of subordinate priories and convents. Talk about a franchise model. The serfs who worked the land were part of this feudal system, bound to the soil but vital to the monastery's prosperity. And let's bust a myth while we're at it. The life of a monk wasn't all about contemplation and introspection. Sure, there were moments of silent reflection, but much of your day was filled with labor, both physical and intellectual. From copying manuscripts to brewing beer, monks were the glue holding medieval society together. Their work kept the gears of the economy turning and preserved the knowledge that would later fuel the Renaissance. So, as you sit in the dimly lit chapel, struggling to stay awake through the Latin chants, remember that you're part of an enduring tradition. You're at the heart of a complex system that keeps your community thriving. And while the romantic notion of monastic life might conjure images of peaceful gardens and serene meditation, the reality is a relentless schedule that demands both discipline and devotion. The morning light finally begins to filter through the stained glass, and your day in the monastery is just getting started. You've got prayers to recite, fields to tend, and maybe, just maybe, a bit of time for rest before the cycle begins anew. It's a life of routine, sure, but also one of purpose, a balance of the spiritual and the practical, the sacred and the mundane. With the first light of dawn peeking through the stained glass, it's time to shuffle off to breakfast. And by breakfast, I mean a humble bowl of porridge. Forget the continental spread or the bottomless mimosa brunch. Here, simplicity reigns supreme. But don't let the oatmeal fool you. This isn't a medieval version of a bland diet. The porridge is more than a meal. It's an art form honed by necessity and creativity. So why porridge? Well, grains were the backbone of medieval diets. And in a monastery, you've got to fuel the spiritual and the physical without breaking the vow of poverty. Oats, barley, and sometimes wheat were grown right on monastery grounds, making them cheap and cheerful staples. Plus, let's face it, nobody's getting a Michelin star for breakfast here. The goal is sustenance, not luxury, though you might get a splash of honey or a handful of dried fruits on feast days if you're lucky. Talk about living on the edge. Now, don't go picturing a bunch of monks wearily spooning gruel in silence. The refectory, where meals are taken, isn't a library. Sure, there's an air of solemnity, an acknowledgement of the divine, but these are also moments of camaraderie. Meals are communal, a brief pause in the day's relentless rhythm where you can exchange a nod or a rare word with your fellow monks. It's a small reprieve before diving back into the day's duties, a reminder that even within the austerity, there's a sense of belonging. Once the bowls are cleared, it's time to roll up those sleeves, figuratively, of course. Habits aren't exactly sleeve-friendly, and get to work. And work means agriculture, the beating heart of monastic life. Forget about today's farm-to-table trends. Monasteries practically invented the concept. Everything from vineyards to herb gardens thrived within these spiritual fortresses, making them self-sufficient powerhouses. You've got to hand it to those monks. They were medieval multitaskers par excellence. Let's start with the vineyards. Monasteries didn't just dabble in viticulture. They were downright pioneers. The Cistercians, for example, were instrumental in developing the vineyards of Burgundy, which still produce some of the world's most sought-after wines. And here's a fun fact. Champagne owes a debt to Dame Pérignon, a Benedictine monk who figured out how to keep those bubbles from turning into an explosive disaster. So next time you're toasting with a glass of bubbly, remember you've got a medieval monk to thank for your sparkling soiree. But it wasn't all about the grapes. Monasteries cultivated an array of crops, from grains to vegetables, supporting not only their own needs, but often the surrounding community as well. They were centers of agricultural innovation, experimenting with crop rotation and irrigation long before it was cool. The herb gardens, meanwhile, were the medieval equivalent of a pharmacy. Monks didn't just grow herbs for flavor, they were the go-to sources for medicinal remedies. Fever, try some willow bark. Stomachache, a bit of mint should do the trick. These gardens were the apothecaries of their time, blending the spiritual with the scientific in a fragrant symphony. And let's not forget the economic side of things. The monks' agricultural prowess wasn't just about self-sufficiency. It was a savvy business move. Monasteries weren't just isolated enclaves. They were economic engines. Surplus crops could be sold or traded, bringing in revenue that supported the monastery's spiritual and charitable missions. It's a win-win situation. Feed the soul, feed the community, and keep those coffers filled. But let's bust a myth, shall we? Life wasn't all pastoral bliss. The romantic image of monks tending lush gardens overlooks the back-breaking labor involved. Farming in the Middle Ages was no walk in the park. It was a slog, often at the mercy of the elements, with no guarantees of a good harvest. And let's not even get started on medieval pest control. It's a wonder anything grew at all. Yet despite the hardships, the monks persisted, driven by a blend of faith and necessity. As you tramp out to the fields, it's clear that this isn't just about sustenance. It's a spiritual exercise. The Benedictine rule emphasizes labor as a form of prayer, a way to honor God through the work of your hands. It's a philosophy that sees no divide between the sacred and the secular, where planting a seed is as much an act of devotion as chanting a psalm. You're not just cultivating crops, you're cultivating character. So there you are, in the heart of the monastery, a place where the spiritual and the practical intertwine in a daily dance. It's a life of discipline and dedication, of simplicity and subtle indulgence. And as you labor in the fields, you're not just tilling soil, you're part of a legacy that's both ancient and enduring. A reminder that even in the simplest of routines, there lies a profound purpose. And as the sun climbs higher in the sky, it's clear that your day in this medieval microcosm is just beginning. There's more to discover, more to learn, and more to be done before the cycle completes once again. As the sun reaches its zenith, casting a gentle glow across the stone walls of the monastery, you find yourself slipping away from the earthy toil of the fields. It's time to trade the plough for prayer, as midday heralds the arrival of the Christmas Mass, a spiritual spectacle of the highest order in your monastic life. It's like the Super Bowl for monks, but with more incense and less face paint. So, what makes this Mass so special, aside from being the highlight of your austere year? First, let's talk symbolism. This isn't just a gathering for a quick hymn and some holy water sprinkles. This is a full-blown bells and whistles affair, minus the actual bells, of course, as they are reserved for the more mundane task of waking you at ungodly hours. Christmas Mass is steeped in rituals that go back centuries, designed to lift the soul to celestial heights. The ceremony is a tapestry of Latin liturgy, sacred vestments, and who could forget the angelic strains of Gregorian chant. Ah, Gregorian chant, the Spotify of the medieval monastery. Named after Pope Gregory I, who may or may not have actually invented it, this chant is the musical equivalent of a warm embrace from a heavenly choir. It's not just music, it's a tool for transcendence, intended to elevate the soul and silence the mind's chatter. Imagine 100 voices merging into one harmonious sound, filling the chapel with an ethereal resonance that could make even the most stoic monk crack a tranquil smile. In a world without Netflix or noise-cancelling headphones, this is your Goda for a mental escape. But let's not get too lost in the reverie. While the Mass is a time for worship, it's also a reminder of the monastery's role as both a spiritual refuge and a political player. The church isn't just a house of God. It's an institution with fingers in many pies, from theological to temporal. Papal decrees could make or break a monastery's standing, and the local lords, they've got their eyes on the monastery's wealth like kids in a candy store. Monasteries, despite their vows of poverty, were often rolling in resources, thanks to landholdings, tithes, and donations from the pious or the guilt-ridden. This wealth made them targets for both envy and aggression. Local lords, ever the opportunists, often viewed these religious institutions as cash cows ripe for milking. And while the church had the heavenly mandate, it often found itself entangled in earthly politics, navigating a minefield of alliances and rivalries. Take, for instance, the Cluniac reforms of the 10th century. These reforms aimed to free monastic communities from secular influence, emphasizing spiritual purity over political entanglements. Sounds noble, right? Except it wasn't just about holiness. It was a power play, a way to wrest control from local nobility and centralize authority under the papacy. The reforms effectively turned monasteries into ecclesiastical fortresses, protecting them from worldly interference, at least in theory. Primary sources from the time, such as charters and papal bulls, reveal a constant tug-of-war between spiritual ideals and political realities. A charter from 1098, for example, might list the lands granted to a monastery, while a papal bull might outline the privileges bestowed upon it, like a medieval VIP pass. These documents highlight the delicate balancing act monasteries performed, juggling devotion with diplomacy. But let's zoom out for a moment. The serene image of monks in quiet contemplation is only part of the picture. Beneath the tranquil exterior lies a world of tension and intrigue. Monasteries were power centers, as much political players as they were spiritual sanctuaries. The Christmas Mass, with all its ritual and reverence, is a microcosm of this duality, a celebration of divine mystery and a reminder of the worldly machinations that underpin it. So, as you kneel in the candlelit chapel, enveloped by the haunting melodies of the chant, you're not just participating in a religious rite. You're bearing witness to a tradition that's as much about earthly influence as it is about heavenly grace. The Mass is a testament to the monastery's role as a beacon of faith and a bastion of power, a place where the sacred and the secular waltz in an eternal dance. As the final notes of the chant fade into the vaulted ceiling, leaving a lingering echo of serenity, you're reminded that this spiritual interlude is but a respite. Beyond the chapel doors, the world awaits, with its challenges and opportunities, its alliances and conflicts. And while the Mass may offer a moment of transcendence, the reality of monastic life is a complex tapestry of devotion and duty, reverence and responsibility. For now, though, you savor the silence, the brief pause in the day's relentless rhythm. It's a chance to reflect, to recharge, before the cycle begins anew. And as you rise from your pew, you carry with you the weight of history, a reminder that even in the most sacred of spaces, the echoes of the past reverberate, shaping the present and whispering of the future. So, what's next? More than you might expect. The bells will soon toll again, calling you to the afternoon's obligations. But for now, you linger a moment longer, letting the peace of the Mass wash over you. It's a fleeting solace in a life of constant motion, a reminder of the enduring balance between the divine and the earthly. And as you step back into the world, you carry that balance with you, a beacon of light in the darkness, a testament to the enduring power of faith and the unyielding complexity of human history. As you step back into the bustling corridors of monastic life, Christmas Mass still echoing in your ears, it's time to switch gears from spiritual nourishment to the all-important task of feeding the body. Yes, it's dinner time, or as medieval monks would call it, a midday meal that's the piece de resistance of the day. Now, if you've got visions of lavish feasts and overflowing goblets, let's reel that in a bit. The reality is far less Game of Thrones and more like a Spartan diet plan. Monastic meals were consumed in silence, save for the soothing drone of a monk reading scripture in the background. It's like having an audiobook at dinner, except the genre is strictly religious. Food in the monastery wasn't just about sating hunger, it was a form of spiritual discipline. The Benedictine rule which governed monastic life was pretty clear: moderation in all things. Eating was a necessity, not a pleasure. Forget about piling your plate high. Portion control was the name of the game. One might even say that medieval monks were the original intermittent fasters. Fasting and feasting were carefully balanced acts of devotion, with fasting being the more common of the two. Let's get into the nitty-gritty. The meal usually consisted of simple fare: bread, legumes, vegetables, and the occasional fish. Meat was a rarity, reserved for feast days or when medicinally necessary. Imagine a dietitian's dream: low in fat, high in fiber, and plenty of greens. But don't let the frugality fool you. This was a menu designed to keep both the spirit and body in tip-top shape for a life of devotion and labor. And speaking of labor, let's debunk the myth of monastic isolation. These monks weren't just secluded scholars or spiritual hermits. They were plugged into a network that stretched across Europe. Monasteries were hubs of trade and communication, where ideas and goods flowed as freely as the Tiber through Rome. Think of them as the medieval internet, minus the cat memes and social media rants. Trade routes crisscrossed the continent, with monasteries often serving as waypoints. They were strategically located, often near rivers or major roads, making them ideal rest stops for merchants and travelers. Take the silk trade, for example. Monasteries in Italy and France were key players in the industry, importing silk threads from the East and weaving them into exquisite textiles. And let's not forget the wine trade, with Burgundy's Cistercian monks practically monopolizing the market. Now, that's a grapevine worth spreading. But it wasn't just goods that moved along these routes. Ideas traveled too, carried in the minds and manuscripts of monks who journeyed between abbeys. The intellectual exchange that monasteries facilitated was akin to a Renaissance fair of the mind, minus the turkey legs and jesters. Texts on theology, philosophy, and science were copied and disseminated, preserving knowledge that would lay the groundwork for future intellectual revolutions. Now, let's talk numbers. A well-connected monastery might manage estates covering hundreds, even thousands of acres. The Abbey of Cluny, for instance, had influence over 450 subordinate priories at its height. These were not just religious outposts. They were economic engines driving local economies. The sheer scale of their operations was staggering, with everything from agriculture to artisanal crafts contributing to a monastery's wealth. And wealth, my friends, was a double-edged sword. It brought influence and power, but also made monasteries targets of envy and political intrigue. Balancing the books was as much about navigating these treacherous waters as it was about spiritual stewardship. Monastic leaders needed the acumen of a CFO and the diplomacy of a seasoned statesman. So, as you settle into your silent meal, listening to the rhythmic cadence of Scripture, remember that you're part of a complex network, one that's as much about earthly connections as it is about heavenly aspirations. While the surface might suggest a life of serene isolation, the reality is a far cry from solitude. Monasteries were the beating heart of medieval Europe, with their influence reaching far beyond their cloistered walls. And there you have it, a day in the life where the spiritual and the physical, the isolated and the interconnected, dance together in a delicate balance. It's a life of discipline and devotion, of simplicity and subtle indulgence. And as you dip your bread into the communal part, remember that you're not just breaking bread, you're breaking myths, discovering that even in the most cloistered of communities, the world is never really that far away. As you dip your bread into the communal part, remember that you're not just breaking bread, you're breaking myths, discovering that even in the most cloistered of communities, the world is never really that far away. And now, as the day begins to wind down, it's time for the evening's grand finale. Vespers and Compline, the spiritual bookends of the day. If the morning matins was your spiritual espresso shot, then these evening services are your chamomile tea, easing you into a pensive end to the day. The Vespers, or evening prayers, are a highlight of monastic life. As the sun sets, painting the monastery walls with a golden hue, you gather with your fellow monks in the dimly lit chapel. The air is thick with incense, and the chants resonate through the stone arches, creating an atmosphere that's as serene as it is solemn. It's a time to reflect on the day's labors and to offer thanks, a moment of calm before the night descends. Now, let's not get too starry-eyed here. While this sounds idyllic, the reality was often less tranquil. Picture this, monks nodding off in the pews, their heads bobbing like drowsy sunflowers as the chants drone on. After all, when your day starts at 2 a.m., staying awake for evening prayers is a Herculean feat. The Compline, which follows Vespers, is the final act, the spiritual lullaby to close out the day. It's a time for confession and forgiveness, a chance to clear the slate before the cycle begins anew. But here's the kicker. The simplicity of these services belies the complexity of monastic life. You see, beneath the veneer of spiritual devotion lies a world of political maneuvering and economic strategy. Monasteries weren't just religious retreats. They were hubs of power and influence, with monks playing the Game of Thrones centuries before George R. Martin put pen to paper. Take, for instance, the economic muscle of these monastic communities. By the 13th century, the wealthiest monasteries, like Cluny or Westminster, managed estates that rivaled those of secular lords. Their coffers were filled by tithes, rents, and sales of produce, making them formidable players in the medieval economy. But it wasn't just about hoarding wealth. Monasteries were also centers of innovation. They pioneered agricultural techniques, developed water mills, and even ventured into early forms of banking. Yes, you heard that right. Monks were the original venture capitalists, funding everything from local parish projects to the construction of grand cathedrals. Yet, with great power comes great responsibility, or, in the case of medieval monasteries, great scrutiny. Their wealth made them targets of envy and suspicion. Secular rulers often eyed monastic lands with a mix of greed and resentment, leading to power struggles that played out in both subtle manipulations and outright confrontations. For example, in 1066, William the Conqueror's land grabs included monastic properties, reshaping the map of English monasticism. So while monks were busy chanting, they were also engaged in a high-stakes game of political chess. And let's not forget the internal dynamics. Monasteries were not immune to the petty squabbles and power struggles that define any human institution. The rule of Saint Benedict might have emphasized humility and obedience, but that didn't stop ambitious monks from jostling for positions of authority. Abbot elections could be fiercely contested, with factions forming and loyalties tested. Imagine the tension as the community gathered to choose their leader, a blend of spiritual discernment and political maneuvering that would make a modern election campaign blush. So, what's the takeaway here? Monastic life was a tapestry of contradictions, a pursuit of spiritual purity, yes, but also a powerhouse of medieval economics and politics. It was a world where the sacred and the secular were inextricably linked, each influencing the other in a delicate dance. The chants of Vespers and Compline, while soothing, were underscored by the restless hum of monastic enterprise, a reminder that even in the quietest corners of the world, power and politics are never far away. As you leave the chapel, the shadows lengthening across the cloister, it's a moment for reflection. The ancient stones underfoot have borne witness to centuries of devotion and intrigue, of spiritual quests and worldly ambitions. The echoes of those chants linger in the air, a testament to the enduring legacy of monastic life. It's a legacy that continues to shape our world, from the agricultural techniques that sustain our fields to the manuscripts that preserved the seeds of the Renaissance. And here's the kicker. Despite the centuries that separate us from those medieval monks, their influence is woven into the fabric of modern life. The universities that educate today's leaders owe a debt to the monastic scribes who copied texts by candlelight. The wines we toast with at celebrations have their roots in monastic vineyards. Even the very idea of a community bound by shared purpose and discipline finds echoes in our institutions, from corporations to charitable organizations. So, as you settle into yourself for the night, the day's labors behind you and the promise of a new dawn ahead, take a moment to appreciate the dual nature of monastic life. It was a life of contrasts, of contemplation and action, poverty and power, isolation and influence. And it's a reminder that history is never just black and white. It's a rich tapestry of stories and lessons, each thread contributing to the larger picture. In the quiet of the evening, as you prepare to rest, remember that those chants and shadows continue to speak to us, urging us to consider the complexities of our own lives. And as you drift off to sleep, perhaps you'll find yourself dreaming not of dragons, but of monks, those medieval multitaskers who navigated a world as intricate and challenging as our own. Let their legacy be both a comfort and a challenge as we carry their stories forward into the future, ever mindful of the past. In Florence, circa 1488, a young Michelangelo Buonarroti found himself in a situation more befitting a sitcom than the hallowed halls of art history. Picture a scrappy 13-year-old, eager to swap the dusty books of grammar school for the vibrant chaos of an artist's workshop. And why shouldn't he? The city was practically bursting with frescoes and sculptures, each corner echoing the genius of giants like Donatello and Brunelleschi. Michelangelo's father, Ludovico, wasn't thrilled about his son's artistic ambitions. He had grander plans, like turning the boy into a respectable bureaucrat. But Michelangelo, stubborn as a Renaissance mule, had other ideas. Against his father's wishes, he wangled himself an apprenticeship with Domenico Ghirlandaio, one of Florence's top-tier painters. He was, after all, part of the city's artistic aristocracy, or so it seemed. Now, Ghirlandaio's workshop wasn't exactly the Zen garden of creativity you might expect. Think more along the lines of a Renaissance assembly line, churning out religious commissions faster than you can say Madonna and Child. For the young Michelangelo, it was a crash course in the gritty reality of art as commerce. He quickly learned that color palettes weren't just about aesthetics. They were about costs, too. Lapis lazuli was as precious as gold, and patrons had a penchant for haggling. But here's where it gets juicy. In the bustling hub that was Ghirlandaio's studio, Michelangelo's artistic brilliance began to shine, or rather, it would have, if not for a certain Pietro Torrigiano. Torrigiano, a fellow apprentice with the charm of a porcupine and the temper to match, didn't appreciate Michelangelo's penchant for showing off. Because let's face it, the kid was a prodigy, probably reminding everyone of that one friend who always won at trivia night. The tension reached its peak in a classic tale of artistic rivalry, resulting in Torrigiano punching Michelangelo square in the face. The punch was so fierce, Michelangelo's nose was broken, forever giving him a slightly crooked profile. Torrigiano later bragged about this act of vandalism, claiming he was proud to mar the face of someone he saw as too goody two-shoes. Michelangelo carried that broken nose for life, a physical reminder that the world of art was as cutthroat as it was creative. But why was the world of art so competitive? Well, to answer that, you need to understand Florence in the late 15th century. The city was a melting pot of politics and culture, an intersection where art wasn't just about beauty, it was power incarnate. Florence was a republic, yet in reality, it was tightly gripped by the Medici family, masters of the not-so-subtle art of political maneuvering. The Medicis knew that art could bolster their image, so they spent lavishly to commission works that would awe both the citizenry and rival states. In this high-stakes game of artistic chess, a well-placed fresco could sway popular opinion as effectively as a well-campaigned speech. Amid this socio-economic whirlwind, artists were more like celebrities come propagandists than solitary dreamers. There was serious cash to be made, and young Michelangelo was eager to claim his slice of the pie. He was living in a time when Florence's population was about 70,000, small by today's standards, but a bustling metropolis back then. In this city, art was everywhere, from the grandeur of the cathedral dome to the intricate details on a local banker's jacket. Michelangelo's early years were shaped by these realities, a cocktail of ambition, talent, and the occasional broken nose. He was a prodigy honed in a city where art was both a personal and political statement. While the romantic narrative paints Michelangelo as a lone genius laboring under the divine spark of creativity, the truth was messier and more thrilling. It was a world where art was not only a pursuit of beauty, but also a deadly serious business. Michelangelo's journey from a rebellious apprentice to an artistic titan was as much about dodging punches as it was about mastering paintbrushes. Now, let's shift gears from dodging fists to chiseling marble, because Michelangelo's rise to fame was paved with stone, specifically the marble of the Pieta and David. Ah, the Pieta, a slice of Renaissance perfection carved in 1498, when Michelangelo was just 23. Picture this, a young artist striding into Rome, the city that was the heartbeat of Christendom, with nothing but ambition and a chisel. Commissioned by Cardinal Jean de Bilhers, the Pieta was intended to be a funeral monument. But Michelangelo had other ideas, like turning it into a masterpiece that would make the Pope do a double take. Now, we're talking about a sculptor whose hands could tease emotion from cold stone, transforming a block of marble into a tender scene of the Virgin Mary cradling a lifeless Christ. It's the kind of talent that makes you wonder if he had some sort of divine heartline. But let's not get too starry-eyed here. This wasn't just an artist lost in his muse. It was a savvy business move. The Pieta wasn't just art. It was a strategic entry ticket into the upper echelons of Renaissance patronage. The logistics behind this masterpiece were far from romantic. Michelangelo sourced the marble from Carrara, a quarry so renowned that even today it's like the Gucci of stone. Transporting this hefty slab over 100 kilometers wasn't exactly a Sunday stroll. Picture oxen dragging tons of marble over treacherous roads, while Michelangelo probably bit his nails down to stubs, hoping it would arrive intact. And let's not forget the financial gymnastics. Michelangelo was paid 450 ducats, which translates to about $70,000 today, a tidy sum, especially for a young artist. So much for the myth of the starving artist. The Pieta was a hit, catapulting Michelangelo into the limelight. But fame isn't all glitz and glamour. Word on the Renaissance street is that Michelangelo overheard some visitors accrediting the Pieta to another sculptor. Not one to let his glory be stolen. He carved his name across Mary's sash, his only signed piece. Talk about a mic drop in marble. Fresh off this triumph, Michelangelo returned to Florence, the city that had once been the backdrop of his broken nose days, to tackle his next colossal challenge, David. Now, if the Pieta was a strategic coup, David was a full-blown declaration of artistic war. Commissioned by the Florence Cathedral, this wasn't just another sculpture. It was a political statement, a symbol of the city's defiance against overwhelming odds. Florence, then a tiny republic in the shadow of larger powers, saw itself in David, a scrappy underdog poised to take on giants. The logistics of David would make any project manager break out in a sweat. Michelangelo was handed a massive block of marble that had been botched by two other artists. It was practically the Renaissance version of upcycling. The slab was so weather-worn it was nicknamed the Giant, and Michelangelo had to carve his masterpiece outdoors because it was too large to fit in his studio. For nearly 3 years, he toiled under the elements, chipping away to reveal the 17-foot-tall figure that would redefine Renaissance art. Now, let's talk numbers. Michelangelo was paid 400 florins for David, roughly equivalent to $65,000 today. But don't be fooled by the seemingly modest amount. In a time when a laborer earned about 50 florins annually, Michelangelo was raking it in like the top-billed artist he was. His earnings allowed him to live comfortably, invest in property, and build a workshop that churned out art like a well-oiled machine. Of course, even a genius like Michelangelo wasn't immune to the whims of public opinion. The placement of David sparked a civic debate more heated than a reality TV reunion. Initially meant for a cathedral niche, David was deemed too magnificent to be tucked away. Instead, he was installed in front of the Palazzo Vecchio, Florence's city hall, standing as a sentinel of the Republic for all to see. And Michelangelo, He was now the artistic equivalent of a rock star, with commissions rolling in faster than you can say Renaissance. Still, beneath the sheen of success, Michelangelo was no stranger to the financial headaches that came with his grand projects. Art in the Renaissance was as much about cash flow as creativity. The marble had to be bought, tools maintained, and assistants paid. Invoices and payments were meticulously recorded, and Michelangelo was known to negotiate fiercely, ensuring his coffers were as full as his workshop. For all the romantic notions of the tortured artist, Michelangelo was a shrewd businessman, fully aware that genius alone doesn't pay the bills. So, what do we make of Michelangelo's rise to fame? It's a tale that busts the myth of the solitary, suffering artist. Here was a man who understood the art of the deal as well as the art of the chisel. His masterpieces, born from a blend of raw talent, strategic commissions, and savvy negotiations, were as much about securing his legacy as they were about artistic expression. In the Renaissance world, where art was the currency of power and influence, Michelangelo was both a creator and a player, a man who carved his own destiny, one masterpiece at a time. And while we savor the romance of his genius, let's not overlook the reality. Michelangelo was a Renaissance powerhouse who deftly navigated the economic and political landscapes of his time. As we continue to explore his life and works, expect more of this intoxicating blend of art, intrigue, and ambition, because the story of Michelangelo is far from over. Michelangelo's journey from marble to masterpiece was a testament to his tenacity, but let's not kid ourselves. His life was about to get even more colorful. Enter Pope Julius Roman II, a pontiff with more ambition than a reality TV contestant. Known as the warrior pope, Julius didn't just want to lead the church. He wanted to leave a legacy that echoed through eternity. And what better way to do that than by commissioning art that would make even the heavens jealous? So, in 1508, Michelangelo found himself in the Vatican, caught between the divine and the decidedly human. Julius had originally hired him to build a grand tomb, but in a move that was as unpredictable as the weather, he decided instead that the Sistine Chapel ceiling needed a makeover. Talk about a pivot. Now Michelangelo, a sculptor by trade, was tasked with painting over 5,000 square feet of curved ceiling. This was no simple weekend DIY project. It was art history's equivalent of climbing Everest with a paintbrush. The relationship between Michelangelo and Julius was as tempestuous as a soap opera plot. Michelangelo wasn't exactly thrilled about the switch from stone to fresco. He grumbled that he was a sculptor, not a painter, and certainly not one for high-altitude artwork. But Julius was a man who got what he wanted, often through sheer force of will. He was known for his fiery temper, and even stormed into battle himself, armor and all. You can almost imagine him staring Michelangelo down, daring him to refuse. This artistic wrestling match between genius and patron lasted 4 long years. Michelangelo worked under conditions more akin to a medieval torture chamber than an art studio. Imagine spending hours on end lying on your back on a scaffold, paint dripping onto your face, while trying to create the most intricate religious scenes imaginable. He developed special techniques just to keep the paint from falling off the ceiling. Genius moves that involved plastering sections at a time so the paint would adhere properly. And the logistics, absolutely bonkers. The Sistine Chapel ceiling is about 68 feet off the ground and over 130 feet long. Michelangelo had to invent a new kind of scaffold, supported at the walls rather than the floor, so the chapel could still be used for services. Talk about multitasking under pressure. And let's not forget the economics of the whole endeavor. Michelangelo was paid 3,000 ducats over the course of the project, roughly equivalent to $500,000 today. A small fortune, sure, but for 4 years of neck-breaking work and constant papal pressure, it was more of a golden handcuff than a windfall. What makes this endeavor even more astonishing is that Michelangelo was essentially flying solo. Unlike many artists of the time who worked with teams of assistants, Michelangelo took most of the work upon himself. His perfectionism was legendary, and he wasn't keen on anyone else leaving their mark on his masterpiece. This meant he meticulously painted over 300 figures himself. If you think your job is demanding, try imagining that. While his brush was moving at a frenetic pace, so was his pen. Michelangelo's letters home were full of vivid descriptions and a healthy dose of Renaissance grumbling. He wrote about the physical toll of the job, the isolation, and his constant sparring with Julius. His wit was as sharp as his paintbrush. He once quipped that, thanks to the awkward positions he had to paint in, he looked like a goitered old man, and that his stomach was squashed under his chin. Despite the complaints, the Sistine Chapel ceiling turned out to be nothing short of miraculous. Its creation was both an act of divine inspiration and sheer human determination. The ceiling is a kaleidoscope of biblical narratives, from the creation of Adam to the fall of man. These weren't just pretty pictures. They were theological lessons, political statements, and artistic revolutions rolled into one. Michelangelo didn't just paint a ceiling. He painted a vision of the universe that still leaves us awestruck today. Yet, for all its grandeur, the ceiling's creation wasn't without its hiccups. Michelangelo had to deal with mold, the constant threat of papal interference, and the challenge of perspective on a curved surface. The frescoes had to be calculated to look proportionate from the floor. It was artistry and geometry dancing a complicated waltz. Now, about that legendary finger touch, the creation of Adam. It's been parodied more times than a pop song, but remains one of art's most iconic images. What's fascinating is how Michelangelo managed to infuse such a simple gesture with so much emotion and grandeur. It's a testament to his skill and vision, and perhaps a nod to his stubbornness in not settling for anything less than monumental. As the final touches dried, and the scaffolding came down in 1512, Michelangelo had not only conquered the Sistine Chapel ceiling, but had also redefined what was possible in art. His relationship with Julius remained as contentious as ever, but there's no denying they were two sides of the same ambitious coin. Julius got his masterpiece, Michelangelo got his fame, and the world got a ceiling that has been the subject of millions of craned necks and sore backs ever since. In the end, the Sistine Chapel ceiling wasn't just a job for Michelangelo. It was his magnum opus, a work that encapsulated the Renaissance spirit of pushing boundaries and daring to dream. It was a canvas that stretched his talents and patience to the limit, but in doing so, it painted him into the annals of history. So next time you find yourself staring at the ceiling, remember, sometimes the only way forward is to look up. And in Michelangelo's case, looking up not only changed his life, but also the course of art history itself. If Michelangelo's brushwork on the Sistine Chapel ceiling was a defining chapter, his later years were a masterclass in adaptation amidst the swirling political and religious changes of Renaissance Italy. You'd think the man might take a well-deserved breather after redefining ceiling art, but no, Michelangelo was far from done. He moved on to the Last Judgment, a fresco that would have its own tumultuous birth. Fast forward to 1536, when Michelangelo was commissioned by Pope Clement Roman VII to craft this monumental piece for the Sistine Chapel's altar wall. By this point, Michelangelo was the Renaissance's elder statesman, having outlasted many of his contemporaries, including the infamous Julius Roman II. But Clement Roman VII's successor, Pope Paul Roman III, who finally got to see the Last Judgment completed in 1541, was no less a character. Paul Roman III was a Farnese, a family known for their political maneuvering, and he had his own plans for Michelangelo's talents. The Last Judgment wasn't just another fresco. It was Michelangelo's commentary on the spiritual anxieties of the time. Picture this, a sprawling scene filled with over 300 figures, some rising towards salvation and others tumbling into damnation. It's a chaotic dance that reflects the uncertainty of an era marked by Protestant Reformation and Catholic Counter-Reformation. Michelangelo, never one to shy away from controversy, depicted these souls in the nude, a bold move that sparked a scandal worthy of a Renaissance tabloid. Let's talk economics, because art isn't just about splashing paint. Michelangelo was paid 200 gold ducats for this apocalyptic vision, roughly $200,000 today. But that wasn't just pocket change. It was a testament to the value placed on art as a tool for both spiritual inspiration and political influence. The Catholic Church was in the midst of a PR campaign, battling the Protestant wave with a visual blitzkrieg that would make modern spin doctors proud. And here's a juicy bit. While Michelangelo was splashing his blues and reds, the Council of Trent was busy debating the role of art in worship. The nudes in the Last Judgment were a bit too risque for the church's moral police, leading to a posthumous cover-up operation known as the Fig Leaf Campaign. Daniel da Volterra, one of Michelangelo's students, was tasked with painting over the offending bits, a job that earned him the nickname Il Braghiton, or the Breeches Maker. But Michelangelo wasn't just painting, he was also building. Enter St. Peter's Basilica, the architectural juggernaut that would consume the latter part of his life. When Michelangelo took over as chief architect in 1546, he was 71, an age when most are thinking about retirement, not redesigning the epicenter of Christendom. The basilica had been a construction site for decades, a victim of shifting papal visions and architectural squabbles. Michelangelo wasn't just picking up a hammer and chisel, he was stepping into a political minefield. The basilica was Rome's answer to its Protestant critics, a statement of Catholic grandeur. Michelangelo inherited a design from the likes of Bramante and Raphael, but he wasn't about to be a mere caretaker. He scrapped the plans for a conventional Latin cross layout for a more unified Greek cross, topped with a dome that would become a hallmark of Renaissance architecture. Now, let's not overlook the logistical circus that was 16th century construction. Imagine coordinating hundreds of workers, from stonemasons to carpenters, in an era without modern cranes or power tools. Michelangelo not only designed, but also oversaw the building process, a hands-on approach that would make any project manager today break out in a cold sweat. And then there was Pope Paul Roman III, a man whose pocket was as deep as his ambition. He funneled vast sums into the Basilica project, understanding that architecture could be as much a weapon as faith. The Basilica wasn't just a church, it was a fortress of Catholicism, a place where art and architecture combined to awe believers and intimidate dissenters. Michelangelo's dome, completed after his death, stands today as a testament to his vision, both artistic and architectural. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Michelangelo's relationship with Pope Paul Roman III was fraught with tension, a reminder that even a titan like Michelangelo couldn't escape the whims of patronage. Paul Roman III was known for his nepotism, elevating family members to high-ranking positions, much to the chagrin of those who preferred merit over bloodline. Michelangelo, who had long been his own man, found himself navigating these treacherous waters with the same skill he applied to his art. While Michelangelo was busy shaping the skyline of Rome, he also had to deal with the practicalities of life. His letters from this period reveal a man constantly preoccupied with finances and family obligations. It turns out, genius doesn't exempt one from the mundane. Michelangelo was as much a businessman as an artist, juggling commissions and managing properties. In the end, Michelangelo's later years were a blend of triumph and toil. His works during this period weren't just about pushing artistic boundaries. They were about survival in a world where art, politics, and religion were inextricably linked. He managed to carve out a legacy that continues to inspire and awe, all while deftly maneuvering through the labyrinthine corridors of power and influence. As we edge closer to the final chapters of Michelangelo's story, remember this. The Renaissance was as much a battle of wits as it was a burst of creativity. Michelangelo, with his chisel in one hand and a keen sense of strategy in the other, was both a warrior and a visionary. And while the legend of Michelangelo remains romantic, the reality reveals a man who was as shrewd as he was skilled. As we look forward to his final years, brace yourself for more twists, turns, and revelations, because in Michelangelo's world, the only certainty was change. As Michelangelo edged toward the final act of his life, the stage was set for a grand legacy, even if the applause was sometimes more muted than one might expect for a man who had literally painted himself into the heavens. While we might like to believe that he spent his golden years basking in the glow of his accomplishments, the reality was a bit more, shall we say, stone-chiseled. Michelangelo was still knee-deep in the gritty business of art and architecture until his last breath in 1564, at the ripe old age of 88, a veritable Methuselah by Renaissance standards when life expectancy was around 40. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The myth of Michelangelo as the solitary, tortured genius is as alluring as it is misleading. Sure, the image of a brooding artist slaving away in the candlelit gloom of his studio has a certain romantic appeal. Yet the truth is far more complex, and dare I say, entertaining. Michelangelo was not some recluse hidden away in an attic. He was a savvy operator, firmly entrenched in the bustling artistic and political scenes of Florence and Rome. He rubbed shoulders with popes and cardinals, navigated the Byzantine intricacies of patronage, and even dabbled in a bit of poetry on the side. In fact, his surviving letters and sonnets, over 300 of them, reveal a man who was as articulate with a quill as he was with a chisel. As for the notion of him being tortured, well, that's more of a Renaissance-era PR campaign than anything. Michelangelo certainly had his share of existential angst. Who among us doesn't? But he was also a man who enjoyed a good laugh and a hearty meal. He had friends, family, and enough commissions to keep the wolves from the door. And let's not forget, he was a property owner, with several houses in Rome and Florence, which he managed with the kind of meticulous care one would expect from an artist who spent years perfecting the human form. Now, onto the legacy part, because that's where the real fireworks begin. It's tempting to put Michelangelo on a pedestal, figuratively, of course, since he did enough of that literally with his sculptures, but his true genius lies in how he transformed the very landscape of art. Before Michelangelo, artists were often seen as mere craftsmen. By the time he was done, they were revered as creative geniuses, ushering in a new era where the artist was as important as the art itself. He paved the way for the likes of Raphael and Leonardo da Vinci, who took up his mantle and ran with it, each adding their own brushstrokes to the canvas of Renaissance art. Michelangelo's influence extended beyond the arts, seeping into the very fabric of Western culture. His David, standing a confident 17 feet tall, became a symbol of human potential and resilience, a Renaissance superhero, if you will. The Sistine Chapel ceiling, with its iconic creation of Adam, has been endlessly reproduced, parodied, and referenced, a testament to its enduring power. But let's not kid ourselves. Michelangelo's legacy isn't just about pretty pictures. It's about the audacity to dream bigger, to push boundaries, and to challenge the status quo. He showed that art could be more than decorative. It could be transformative. Of course, with great legacy comes great myth-making. The romanticized view of Michelangelo as a solitary, suffering artist cloistered away from the world is a narrative as compelling as it is inaccurate. In reality, Michelangelo was a bit of a social butterfly, well aware of the need to network and engage with the movers and shakers of his day. His success was as much about his ability to navigate the political and economic waters of Renaissance Italy as it was about his undeniable talent. He was a master of the art of the deal long before that phrase became a title of a best-selling book. And while we're at it, let's debunk another myth. The idea that Michelangelo was a reluctant participant in the church's grand schemes. He might have grumbled about the demands placed upon him, but he was no mere pawn. Michelangelo understood the power of patronage and used it to his advantage, securing commissions that allowed him to express his creative vision on an epic scale. He was a shrewd businessman, negotiating fees that ensured he could live comfortably while pursuing his artistic ambitions. In the final analysis, Michelangelo was a man of contradictions, a genius who was deeply human, an artist who was also an astute strategist. His legacy is as much about his enduring influence on art as it is about the lessons he imparted on the nature of creativity and ambition. He showed us that genius is not a solitary pursuit, but a collaborative dance with the world around us. His life was a testament to the belief that art is not just an escape from reality, but a way to engage with it more deeply. So, as we close the book on Michelangelo's remarkable journey, let's remember that the man behind the marble was far more than the myths that surround him. He was a Renaissance man in the truest sense, a figure who straddled the worlds of art, politics, and commerce with equal aplomb. And while his works continue to inspire awe and wonder, it's his spirit of relentless pursuit and innovation that truly cements his place in history. Michelangelo may have carved in stone, but his legacy is written in the hearts and minds of those who dare to dream beyond the confines of their own potential. In the rolling hills of Tuscany, where wine flows as freely as gossip, A little town named Vinci gave birth to a boy who would one day make a splash bigger than a Renaissance fountain. Leonardo da Vinci was born on April 15, 1452, to a not-so-traditional family setup that would make modern soap operas look like tame bedtime stories. The boy entered the world as the illegitimate son of a Florentine notary, Ser Piero, the local woman, Caterina. Leonardo was like a Renaissance bonus round, unplanned but packed with unexpected brilliance. Now, being born out of wedlock in 15th century, Italy might sound like a one-way ticket to obscurity, but Leonardo had a knack for turning life's lemons into a rather inventive sort of lemonade. He grew up trailing behind his father in Vinci, a place that, while picturesque, wasn't exactly the epicenter of the Renaissance universe. But little Leo wasn't content to just count sheep or grapes. He was busy counting stars, sketching, and asking questions that would make any teacher nervously shuffle their lecture notes. By the tender age of 14, Leonardo had sketched enough doodles to wallpaper the entire town. His father, Ser Piero, perhaps realizing that his son wasn't cut out for the family business of legal documents, shipped him off to Florence. There, Leonardo would start an apprenticeship under Andrea del Verrocchio, a man who could paint, sculpt, and possibly bake a mean lasagna if needed. Verrocchio was a master of all trades, and his workshop was like a Renaissance version of a Silicon Valley startup, full of energy, innovation, and the occasional explosion of temper. Florence in the 1460 was buzzing with the kind of creative energy that could power a small city today. The Medici family, those grand patrons of the arts, were busy turning Florence into the world's greatest open-air museum. And right in the middle of it all was young Leonardo, eager to soak up knowledge like a sponge in a flood. Under Verrocchio's tutelage, Leonardo learned the delicate art of mixing pigments, the secrets of perspective, and how to keep his wit sharper than his chisels. But let's not pretend Leonardo's early years were all smooth sailing through the Arno. He was a man of eclectic interests, the kind who might start painting a masterpiece only to wander off mid-stroke to investigate the inner workings of a bird's wing or the geometry of a snail's shell. This tendency to zigzag between art and science was both his genius and his Achilles heel. His workshop might have looked more like a mad scientist's lab than a painter's studio, with half-finished canvases sharing space with dissected frogs and mechanical contraptions that would make even the most seasoned inventor scratch their head. Leonardo's experiments didn't always go according to plan. In one particularly memorable fiasco, he attempted to create a giant mechanical lion that could walk and roar, all part of a special commission to impress the King of France. The lion did manage to move, but as for the roaring, well, let's just say it was more of a whimper, like a cat being told it's bath time. Despite these occasional misfires, Leonardo's reputation as a genius in the making began to take shape, albeit with a few quirky edges. One of the most celebrated tales from his apprenticeship involves the baptism of Christ painting. Verrocchio was the main artist, but he let Leonardo paint one of the angels. Legend has it that the young apprentice's angel outshone the rest of the painting, prompting Verrocchio to swear off painting forever. While this story might be a tad embellished, it does highlight Leonardo's knack for making a splash, even when just dipping his toes in the water. Yet, Leonardo wasn't just a wizard with a brush. He was a pioneer of scientific observation. While others saw a bird in flight, Leonardo saw a complex interplay of anatomy and physics. He filled notebooks with sketches and notes that combined art with meticulous scientific detail, a habit that would one day give historians plenty of reasons to dust off their Italian dictionaries. His early fascination with nature and mechanics laid the groundwork for ideas that would be centuries ahead of their time. So, despite the occasional mechanical lion mishap and a tendency to leave projects dangling like a Renaissance cliffhanger, Leonardo's early years set the stage for a life that would redefine what it meant to be a Renaissance man. His blend of curiosity, artistic flair, and scientific inquiry turned the notion of failure on its head, proving that sometimes the road to success is paved with eccentric detours and a few roaring, or rather meowing, lions. So, with his childhood antics and Florentine escapades behind him, Leonardo da Vinci found himself setting sail for Milan in 1482. And why not? Florence was getting a bit crowded with talent, and Leonardo, ever the Renaissance multitasker, craved a stage suited for his ambitious imagination. Enter Ludovico Sforza, known as Il Moro, the Duke of Milan, whose court was a veritable playground for anyone with a knack for art and a talent for engineering wizardry. It was like Leonardo had walked into the Renaissance equivalent of a tech incubator, except instead of coding apps, they were crafting cathedrals and sketching war machines. Ludovico was no ordinary patron. He had a penchant for grandiosity and a love for spectacle that would make a modern pop star blush. He wasn't just looking for an artist. He wanted an all-in-one genius to build his legacy, and in Leonardo he found his guide. The first order of business, a colossal equestrian statue that would outshine anything Italy had ever seen, a tribute to Ludovico's father, Francesco Sforza. This wasn't just any statue. We're talking a 24-foot-tall bronze behemoth. Picture the Statue of Liberty astride a horse, and you're halfway there. Leonardo dove into the project with his usual verve, drafting designs and preparing a clay model that weighed in at a casual 70 tons. But here's where reality comes galloping in. Casting the statue in bronze was a logistical nightmare. We're talking about a feat that would have required more bronze than was used in all of Milan's bells combined. And while Leonardo could dream up the physics of flight, he couldn't conjure up the funds required for such an ambitious project. In a tragic twist of fate, the bronze earmarked for the statue was repurposed into cannons when French forces threatened Milan. So, while the clay model was impressive enough to draw the oohs and ahs of Renaissance onlookers, the statue itself never made it past the planning phase. Talk about a case of bronze envy. Meanwhile, Leonardo wasn't just twiddling his thumbs. Under Ludovico's wing, he was as busy as a barrister during the morning rush, juggling a multitude of projects. He painted portraits, designed costumes for courtly festivities, and in true Leonardo fashion, dabbled in military engineering. The Duke had a taste for the dramatic, and Leonardo was more than happy to oblige with a catalogue of weaponry that was as imaginative as it was impractical. His designs included a giant crossbow that would have been more at home in a fantasy novel than on a battlefield, and a scythe chariot straight out of a chariot race from hell. The problem: most of these inventions never saw the light of day, more sketches than sieges. Leonardo's military inventions, though fascinating, were a bit like trying to build a spaceship with Legos, ambitious but not exactly feasible. His ideas were often ahead of their time, requiring materials and technology that simply didn't exist yet. But let's not be too harsh. If you could design a flying machine in an era when the closest thing to air travel was a pigeon, you deserve a bit of leeway. Leonardo's genius lay not in the immediate application of his ideas, but in the way he pushed the boundaries of what was thought possible. Despite his workload, Leonardo faced financial struggles that would give any modern freelancer cold sweats. Patronage was a fickle business, dependent on the whims and fortunes of the nobility. Payments were often delayed, and Leonardo found himself writing letters, essentially Renaissance invoices, begging for the money he was owed. This was not the romantic image of the solitary genius effortlessly producing masterpieces. It was a man hustling to pay his bills, balancing his artistic dreams with the harsh realities of economic survival. And let's not forget the political chess game Leonardo had to navigate. Milan was a city-state in a constant state of flux, beset by power struggles and foreign threats. The Sforza family was embroiled in a web of alliances and betrayals, and Leonardo had to tread carefully to maintain his position. He wasn't just an artist in a studio. He was a player in a larger drama of Italian politics, where fortunes could turn as quickly as a Venetian gondola. During his time in Milan, Leonardo completed one of his most famous works, The Last Supper, painted on the wall of the convent of Santa Maria del Grazie. It was a masterpiece that combined his artistic skill with his scientific understanding of perspective. But here's the kicker. Leonardo, ever the experimenter, decided to use a new technique involving a dry plaster base to achieve finer details. The result: a painting that started to flake and deteriorate within years. It's a classic case of Leonardo's reach exceeding his grasp, where innovation came at the cost of longevity. Still, The Last Supper remains a cultural icon, even if it's more restoration project than original artwork today. The painting captures a moment of tension and drama, with the apostles reacting to Christ's declaration that one of them would betray him. Leonardo's genius was in the details. the expressions, the hand gestures, the use of light and shadow. It's a testament to his ability to convey human emotion and divine narrative in a single, powerful image. Through all this, it's important to remember that Leonardo was not the solitary genius laboring in isolation. He was surrounded by a network of assistants, apprentices, and collaborators who contributed to his projects. The myth of the lone genius is just that, a myth. Leonardo, like any great innovator, was part of a community of thinkers and creators who collectively pushed the boundaries of what was possible. He may have been the brightest star in the Renaissance sky, but he was far from the only one shining. As Leonardo's time in Milan drew to a close, the winds of political change were blowing. The French invaded in 1499, and Ludovico Sforza was captured, forcing Leonardo to pack up his brushes and notebooks and hit the road once more. It was a turbulent time, but for Leonardo, it was just another chapter in a life defined by movement, innovation, and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. As he left Milan behind, he carried with him the lessons of a decade spent at the crossroads of art and science, ready to face whatever came next with the same boundless curiosity that had guided him thus far. Stay tuned, because Leonardo's adventures are far from over. There's still plenty of paint, parchment, and perplexity to come. And so, with Milan fading in the rear view of history, Leonardo da Vinci found himself back in Florence at the dawn of the 1500, ready to paint a new chapter with his signature blend of genius and chaos. The city was as vibrant as ever, a Renaissance petri dish where art and science mingled like old friends at a particularly lively dinner party. Florence, however, was not just a stroll down memory lane for Leonardo. It was a battleground of artistic rivalry and unfinished masterpieces, a place where even the most brilliant ideas sometimes ended up as nothing more than sketches on yellowing parchment. Now, let's talk about the elephant, or rather, the Mona Lisa, in the room. One of the most famous smiles in history was born during this time. You see, the Mona Lisa, or La Gioconda, as the Italians call her, wasn't just a portrait. She was Leonardo's magnum opus, a piece of art that would outlive its creator by centuries. Painted between 1503 and 1506, this enigmatic lady was likely Lisa Gherardini, the wife of a Florentine merchant named Francesco del Giocondo. But here's where things get interesting. This masterpiece was never delivered to its commissioner. Talk about an artistic cliffhanger. Leonardo's tendency to leave projects hanging like a forgotten laundry load was legendary. He was the ultimate perfectionist, a man who could spend hours, even days, trying to capture the exact play of light on a subject's cheek. The Mona Lisa became a lifelong obsession, a canvas he carried with him wherever he wandered. And while today it's the pride of the Louvre, back then, it was just another one of Leonardo's unfinished symphonies. Imagine commissioning a painting and having the artist waltz off with it for 2 decades. That's Renaissance customer service for you. But why all the fuss about a half-finished painting? Well, Leonardo wasn't just any artist. He was the guy who could make a canvas breathe. His innovative use of sfumato, a technique that blurred lines and softened edges, gave the Mona Lisa a lifelike quality that was revolutionary for the time. Plus, there's that mysterious smile, a smirk that's been analyzed more than politicians' tax returns. Some say it's a smile of secret knowledge. Others think it's just the result of Leonardo's mastery of human expression. Either way, it's a smile that's launched 1,000 art history essays. Meanwhile, when Leonardo wasn't busy crafting enigmatic smiles, he was delving into the more macabre side of his interests, dissecting cadavers. Yes, folks, a Renaissance wonderkind had a side gig as an anatomist, in a time when poking around inside a human body was about as popular as a soggy Renaissance rough. Leonardo was one of the few who dared to dabble. He dissected at least 30 corpses, meticulously sketching muscles, bones, and organs with a precision that would make modern medical illustrators blush. His anatomical studies were groundbreaking, revealing secrets of the human body that wouldn't be widely understood for centuries. But before you start picturing Leonardo as a mad scientist in a dimly lit basement, remember that his dissections were as much about art as they were about science. He wasn't just fascinated by the mechanics of the human form. He wanted to understand it in order to depict it more accurately in his art. It's this intersection of art and science, where brush meets scalpel, that makes Leonardo's work so enduringly fascinating. Of course, doing this kind of work in secret, often at night, added a cloak and dagger element to his anatomical pursuits, because why not add a little drama to the mix? Florence at this time was also the stage for one of the most entertaining rivalries in art history, Leonardo versus Michelangelo. Picture it as the Renaissance version of a heavyweight boxing match, only instead of punches, they traded masterpieces. Michelangelo, that sculptor extraordinaire with a chip on his shoulder the size of the Sistine Chapel, was everything Leonardo wasn't. Brash, intense, and not afraid to get his hands dirty with a block of marble. The competition between these two titans was more than just professional, it was personal. Case in point, the Battle of Anghiari and the Battle of Cassina, two frescoes that were supposed to adorn the walls of Florence's Palazzo Vecchio. Leonardo was tasked with depicting the Battle of Anghiari, while Michelangelo took on the Battle of Cassina. It was a Renaissance showdown, with each artist striving to outdo the other in a display of artistic bravado. Yet, in a twist worthy of a Shakespearean comedy, neither fresco was completed. Leonardo's experimental painting technique proved disastrous, causing his fresco to deteriorate even as he worked on it. Michelangelo, meanwhile, was called away to Rome to start work on a little project called the Sistine Chapel. Talk about a cliffhanger, despite, or perhaps because of, these rivalries and unfinished projects, Leonardo's reputation continued to grow. He was the embodiment of the Renaissance ideal, a man who could paint, sculpt, invent, and dissect with equal passion. But let's not romanticize this too much. The truth is, Leonardo struggled with the same issues that plague creatives today. He grappled with deadlines, financial difficulties, and the ever-present specter of imposter syndrome. He was a genius, yes, but he was also a human being trying to navigate the messy reality of life in the Renaissance. The irony, of course, is that many of Leonardo's unfinished works have become icons in their own right. His sketches and studies, fragments of ideas never fully realized, offer glimpses into the mind of a man who was constantly pushing the boundaries of what was possible. It's a testament to his enduring legacy that even his incomplete works are celebrated as masterpieces. As the 1500s rolled on, the political landscape of Italy shifted like sands in an hourglass. Florence, ever the hotbed of intrigue, was no exception. The city was grappling with its own internal conflicts, and Leonardo, ever the Renaissance drifter, found himself once again drawn to the magnetic pull of new opportunities. His stint in Florence, marked by both triumph and turmoil, was a chapter of contradictions, unfinished yet iconic, competitive yet collaborative. It was a time when art flourished amidst the chaos, and Leonardo, with his insatiable curiosity and boundless talent, stood at the center of it all. But don't go hanging up your brushes just yet. There's more to come in the saga of Leonardo da Vinci. Our intrepid artist, scientist, philosopher was far from finished with his journey through the annals of history. There are still tales to tell, from his ventures into the world of engineering marvels to his final days in France, where he would continue to shape the future with every stroke of his pen, every twist of his mind. So stay tuned, because Leonardo's story is one of perpetual motion, a testament to the enduring power of curiosity and creativity. As Leonardo turned his sights from the vibrant chaos of Florence to the more tranquil pastures of France, he wasn't just swapping scenery, he was stepping into an entirely new chapter of his eclectic life. The year was 1516, and at the ripe age of 64, Leonardo was no spring chicken, but he was still a juggernaut of creativity, curiosity, and, well, cat sketches. King Francis I of France, a monarch with as much appreciation for culture as for conquest, extended an invitation that Leonardo couldn't refuse. So, off Leonardo went, crossing the Alps with his ever-faithful Mona Lisa in tow, ready to become the Renaissance version of a celebrity expat. Those final years in France saw Leonardo housed in the Château du Clos Lucé, a stone's throw from the king's residence at the Château d'Amboise. This wasn't just any royal gig. It was the Renaissance equivalent of being handed the keys to the kingdom. Francis I, who fancied himself a bit of a Renaissance man, was eager to have Leonardo's brain as his personal playground. Leonardo was dubbed premier painter, engineer, and architect to the king, which sounds like a mouthful until you realize it was probably just another Tuesday for him. In this new role, Leonardo was less about painting and more about playing the part of an intellectual idol. His days were spent sketching inventions, dabbling in scientific theories, and of course, charming the French court with tales of his exploits. But let's not kid ourselves. Leonardo was also dealing with the harsh realities of aging. His right hand, the one that had once danced across canvases with such elegance, was now partially paralyzed, likely due to a stroke. Yet, even as his body betrayed him, his mind remained a bustling workshop of innovation. Now, let's talk about those famous notebooks, those enigmatic volumes filled with a mishmash of groundbreaking ideas, recipes for varnish, and yes, doodles of cats. Leonardo's notebooks are the stuff of legend, a chaotic collage of brilliance that would make any modern planner weep. In them, you'll find sketches of flying machines, architectural plans, and anatomical studies that could make a medical textbook blush. But before you start picturing Leonardo as a prophetic genius straight out of a sci-fi novel, remember that many of his inventions were as impractical as they were imaginative. Take, for instance, his design for a helicopter-like contraption, a contrivance that would have required more power than a Renaissance windmill could muster, or his armored vehicle, a tank that was more likely to topple over than tear across a battlefield. Leonardo's inventions were like the wish list of a child with a penchant for gadgets, limited only by the constraints of 16th century technology. He was a man dreaming in a world that hadn't quite caught up with him yet. Of course, the myth of Leonardo as the ultimate Renaissance man is as alluring as it is misleading. Sure, he dabbled in everything from hydrodynamics to horology, but let's face it, the guy was as much a master of procrastination as he was of painting. His notebooks reveal a mind perpetually in motion, yet often caught in its own web of ideas, forever starting projects but rarely finishing them. It's as if Leonardo lived with the eternal conviction that there would always be time for one more sketch, one more experiment. As for his life at the French court, it wasn't all wine and roses. While King Francis showered him with adoration and a cozy stipend of 1,000 gold scudi annually, Leonardo still faced the economic realities of courtly life. The French nobility had a grand appetite for luxury, but an equally impressive capacity for debt, and Leonardo was no stranger to the financial juggling act required to keep the royal coffers from running dry. It was an era when even geniuses had to keep one eye on the ledger and the other on their muses. Yet, amidst the pageantry and politics, Leonardo found a kindred spirit in Francis I, who admired the artist not just for his creations, but for his insatiable curiosity. The king, who was himself an accomplished swordsman and a patron of the arts, saw in Leonardo a reflection of his own aspirations, a man who embodied the Renaissance ideal of boundless knowledge and creativity. Despite the grandeur of his surroundings, Leonardo's final years were also marked by a poignant solitude. He was surrounded by adoring courtiers and curious minds, yet he remained, in many ways, an outsider. His notebooks, those intimate glimpses into his thoughts, reveal a man who pondered the mysteries of the universe as much as the mundane details of daily life. His musings on the nature of water, the flight of birds, and the flow of rivers were peppered with observations on the weather and the ever-present feline companions that wandered into his sketches. And while Leonardo's physical health declined, his intellectual vigor never waned. He continued to explore new ideas, sketching designs for bridges and water pumps, and even imagining a city that could rise above the plague-infested dirt of the medieval streets. His vision for a utopian city, with wide avenues and efficient sanitation, was a testament to his ability to think beyond his time, an urban planner centuries before the term existed. Leonardo's death in 1519, at the wizened age of 67, marked the end of an era. And yet, in true Leonardo fashion, he left behind as many questions as answers. He reportedly died in the arms of King Francis himself, a scene so dramatically romantic that historians have debated its authenticity for centuries. But whether or not the king was present at his deathbed, there's no denying that Leonardo's legacy was already etched into the annals of history, a testament to a life spent at the crossroads of art and science, myth and reality. In the end, Leonardo da Vinci was an artist who painted with the colors of the universe, a scientist who saw the world as his canvas, and a dreamer who dared to sketch the impossible. His life was a tapestry of triumphs and trials, a testament to the power of curiosity and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. As we look back on his final years in France, we see a man who, despite the odds, continued to create, to innovate, and to inspire. A true Renaissance man, in every sense of the word. But don't hang up the story just yet. There's more to unpack as we delve into the legacy of Leonardo, a legacy that continues to shape our understanding of art and science, innovation and imagination. So, stay tuned for the final act, where we explore how Leonardo's ideas, and yes, even those whimsical cat doodles, continue to resonate in the modern world. Fast forward to today, and Leonardo da Vinci is still the rock star of the Renaissance, even if he's been dead for over 5 centuries. His legacy is as complicated as one of his infamous notebooks, full of brilliant, half-finished ideas and the occasional doodle of a perplexed feline. But why do we still care so much about this guy who couldn't even finish a painting on time? Well, strap in, because we're about to dive into the modern fascination with Leonardo and how his blend of art and science set the stage for future innovation. Spoiler alert, it's a tale of myth-busting and the enduring allure of genius. First off, let's tackle the elephant in the room, or rather, the Vitruvian man in the sketchbook. Leonardo was a master of mixing disciplines long before it was cool. He saw no boundary between art and science, treating them more like best friends at a Renaissance sleepover. His drawings of anatomy weren't just artistic exercises, they were scientific studies that could give modern medical textbooks a run for their money. And let's not forget his flight of fancy, literally, with sketches of flying machines that wouldn't look out of place in a Wright brothers notebook. It's this cross-pollination of ideas that makes Leonardo such a standout figure. He was the original interdisciplinary thinker, and his work laid the groundwork for innovations that wouldn't take flight, pun intended, until centuries later. Take, for example, his concept of an armored vehicle. Sure, it might have toppled over faster than you can say, Renaissance tank, but the idea of a mobile, protected war machine was a precursor to modern military vehicles. Leonardo's sketches of a helicopter or an ornithopter, although impractical in his day, were blueprints that whispered of the future. While his contemporaries were busy perfecting the art of fresco, Leonardo was dreaming of a world where man could soar through the sky. And while his feet stayed firmly planted on the ground, his ideas were flying at 30,000 feet. Now, let's talk numbers, because Leonardo's legacy isn't just about pretty pictures and quirky inventions. His works, both complete and fragmentary, are some of the most valuable in the world. The Last Supper and Mona Lisa are cultural icons, with the latter insured for a staggering $850 million, a sum that would make any Renaissance patron clutch their pearls. And his notebooks, scattered across museums and private collections, are priceless windows into the mind of a genius. In 1994, Bill Gates bought the Codex Leicester, one of Leonardo's scientific journals, for $30. $8 million. That's right. Even Leonardo's scribbles come with a price tag that could fund a small country's GDP. But why do we continue to romanticize a man whose work is littered with what-ifs? Part of it is the allure of the unfinished. Leonardo's tendency to leave projects dangling like a soap opera plot twist adds to his mystique. We're intrigued by the potential of what could have been, what masterpieces were left on the cutting room floor of his mind. And then there's his personality, which was as colorful as his palette. He was a vegetarian in an age when meat was a staple, a man who wrote in mirror script for reasons that would baffle a cryptographer. His quirks make him relatable, humanizing the genius behind the legend. It's the imperfections, the unfinished projects, and the eccentricities that make Leonardo feel like more than just a marble bust in a museum. Leonardo's legacy also thrives because he embodies the Renaissance ideal of the polymath. In a world increasingly divided by specialization, he stands as a testament to the power of a curious mind. Leonardo didn't just dip his toes in different disciplines. He cannonballed into them, leaving ripples that are still felt today. His life reminds us that creativity isn't confined to a single field. It's an all-encompassing force that can drive innovation. Whether you're painting a masterpiece or designing a flying machine that's more fantasy than function. And let's not gloss over the economic and political realities of his time that played a part in shaping his genius. Leonardo's work was deeply influenced by the whims of his patrons, the shifting sands of Italian politics, and the relentless hustle to secure funding for his grand ideas. He was as much a businessman as an artist, navigating the intricate dance of patronage with the skill of a diplomat. His story is a reminder that behind every masterpiece is a mixture of talent, opportunity, and a touch of economic savvy. As we look back, Leonardo's life offers a fascinating juxtaposition of legend and reality. He was a man who straddled the line between myth and fact, a brilliant mind caught in the constraints of his time. He reminds us that genius is not about perfection, but about the relentless pursuit of knowledge, the willingness to explore the unknown, and the courage to dream big, sometimes too big. His story is one of curiosity and chaos, a tapestry woven from threads of brilliance, failure, and the occasional unfinished masterpiece. In the end, Leonardo da Vinci's legacy is more than just a collection of paintings and sketches. It's an enduring symbol of human potential, testament to the power of interdisciplinary thinking and the audacity to dream. His life, with all its quirks and contradictions, continues to inspire us to push the boundaries of what's possible, to embrace our imperfections, and to find beauty in the unfinished. As we close the book on Leonardo's story, we do so with the understanding that his legacy isn't just about the past. It's a beacon for the future, a reminder that the quest for knowledge is a journey without end. And that, dear listeners, is the true genius of Leonardo da Vinci. Salem, Massachusetts, 1692, a town teetering on the edge of a nervous breakdown, where the local pastime seemed to be manufacturing paranoia. If you think your neighborhood watch is intense, meet the Puritans of Salem. These folks weren't just looking out for porch pirates. They were on the lookout for the devil himself. And why not? Life in this late 17th century hotspot was about as fun as a Puritan potluck, with a side of religious fervor and a sprinkle of existential dread. In a village where the word fun might as well have been in another language, the Puritans had their hands full just trying to survive. Forget Netflix and chill. It was more like pray and plow. The winters were brutal, with temperatures that could make your smartphone battery give up faster than you on a treadmill. Crops. Well, let's just say they had all the vitality of a wilted salad. Add to that the ever-present fear of Native American attacks, and you've got yourself a community clinging to sanity by a very frayed thread. Enter center stage Reverend Samuel Parris, a man who somehow managed to be both the spiritual leader and the least popular guy at any gathering. If there was a yelp for colonial clergy, Reverend Parris would have been swimming in one-star reviews. His attempt to make ends meet involved running a household that doubled as an unofficial community center of suspicion. Parris brought with him a wife, 3 children, and a slave named Tituba, who would soon be at the heart of the chaos. Now, let's talk about Tituba. Originally from the West Indies, she found herself in the unenviable position of being at the mercy of the Parris household. Tituba's cultural background and practices, like telling stories and using folk magic, were seen as exotic and therefore suspicious by the Puritans. But of course, in a world where anything unfamiliar was automatically suspicious, Tituba didn't stand a chance. Back to Reverend Parris. His sermons could make fire and brimstone sound like a Sunday walk in the park. He was not exactly the let's hold hands and sing Cumbaya type. Instead, Parris was obsessed with the idea that Satan was crashing the Puritan party, and he was just the guy to sniff him out. Naturally, this added an extra layer of tension to the already strained community. If you thought your HOA was strict, try living in a place where even a bad hair day could be interpreted as a sign of demonic possession. The socio-economic climate of Salem was a powder keg just waiting for a match. The village was divided into factions, with land disputes and family rivalries simmering like a slow-cooked stew of resentment. Add to that a series of unfortunate events, failed crops, a smallpox epidemic, and the kind of harsh winters that made you question your life choices, and you have a population living in a pressure cooker of anxiety. It's no wonder they were ready to believe that witches were lurking around every corner. And then, just when you thought it couldn't get any more chaotic, a group of young girls started acting out in ways that would make any parent in 1692 consider taking away their barnets. They twitched, they convulsed, they claimed to be bitten and pinched by invisible forces. It's like TikTok challenges, minus the smartphone, and with a lot more screaming about Satan. The panic spread faster than a viral meme, and suddenly everyone was looking for someone to blame. Welcome to the Puritan version of Who Wants to Be a Witch, where the stakes are high, and the truth is as elusive as a Wi-Fi signal in the middle of the woods. In this environment, accusations flew like arrows, and the community quickly descended into a frenzy of fear and suspicion. It was a witch hunt in the most literal sense, and no one was safe from the finger-pointing. This is the stage on which the infamous Salem witch trials would play out, a tale of hysteria, injustice, and the dark side of human nature. And it all started here, in this little village with big problems, where the line between neighbor and enemy was as thin as the ice on those frigid New England ponds. But don't worry, we're just getting started. There's plenty more drama to come, complete with courtroom antics, dubious confessions, and the sobering reminder that history, much like witch hunts, has a way of repeating itself. As we step into the theater of the Salem witch trials, let's set the stage with some hard-hitting numbers. Around 200 people were accused, 30 found guilty, and 19 hanged. This wasn't just a case of small-town drama. It was a full-blown legal circus, complete with its own brand of tragicomedy. Picture this, a courtroom where the truth was as slippery as a greased pig, and the rules were made up faster than a kid's excuse for why they didn't do their homework. And if you think that's a stretch, wait till you hear about the spectral evidence that was allowed. Yes, folks, ghost stories were given a legal thumbs up. Take that, law and order. Salem had its own version of courtroom theatrics, minus the gavel-banging common sense. So what exactly was spectral evidence? In simple terms, it was the equivalent of saying, "My invisible friend told me you were up to no good," and the court just nodded along as if that was the most reasonable thing they'd heard all day. It was based on the idea that a witch's spirit, or spectre, could leave their body and wreak havoc, a notion that was taken as seriously as a celebrity tweet today. You'd be forgiven for thinking the courtroom was a Hogwarts spin-off, but this was dead serious business with deadly consequences. And speaking of consequences, let's talk about Giles Corey, the man who found himself on the wrong end of a very unfortunate weight loss program. Accused of witchcraft, Corey refused to plead, a move that in the baffling logic of the time was considered an obstruction of justice. The solution? Lay him down and pile heavy stones on top of him until he either pled or, well, didn't. Spoiler alert, he didn't. Corey's last words were reportedly more weight, proving that even when facing the world's first human panini press, he could still deliver a punchline. It's gallows humor at its finest, but also a stark reminder of the grim realities these trials represented. But how did we get here, to this point where logic had taken a holiday and paranoia held court? The socio-economic backdrop offers some clues. Salem was a town divided, both literally and figuratively. The village was split between the more prosperous port town of Salem and the struggling rural Salem village. These tensions were further inflamed by power struggles and land disputes that made the Hatfields and McCoys look like playground squabbles. Money, as it often does, played a starring role in this tragedy. The richer townsfolk could afford the legal gymnastics to dodge accusations, while poorer villagers found themselves in a game of survival with stakes higher than their annual crop yield. Now, let's not forget the role of religion in this drama. Puritans held fast to a belief system that made the most zealous Instagram influencer look like a casual dabbler. For them, the devil wasn't just a metaphorical bad guy. He was a real and present danger lurking in the shadows, ready to recruit witches to do his bidding. In this context, the witch trials were less about justice and more about purging the community of spiritual contaminants. Add to this the smallpox outbreaks and the fear of Native American raids, and you've got a community primed to see the devil's handiwork everywhere. As the trials progressed, the courtroom became a stage for confessions and accusations that were often coerced under duress. Tituba, Reverend Paris's slave, was one of the first to confess, spinning tales of broomstick rides and spectral gatherings. Her confession, whether a strategic move to save her own skin or a product of pressure, opened the floodgates for a deluge of paranoia and finger-pointing. It was like the original chain email scare, but instead of dire warnings about bad luck, it was a direct ticket to the gallows. The trials went on, dragging more and more people into their vortex. Some, like Rebecca Nurse, stood defiant till the end, maintaining their innocence even as the noose tightened. Others were caught in a web of accusations that seemed to grow with each passing day, fed by personal vendettas and community rivalries. It was a grim dance of death, choreographed by fear and superstition, with the hangman as the final arbiter. Yet, in this bleak tableau, there's a peculiar fascination with the absurdity of it all. The Salem witch trials stand as a testament to what happens when fear overrides reason, when justice is served with a side of hysteria, and when human nature shows its darker hues. It's a story that refuses to fade, a cautionary tale wrapped in the eerie allure of the macabre. As we dig deeper into this chapter of history, the trials continue to hold a mirror to our own times, reminding us that the line between vigilance and paranoia is often thinner than we'd like to admit. Stay tuned, because there's more to unravel in this saga of suspicion and scapegoats. The Salem witch trials may be a relic of the past, but their echoes still resonate, offering lessons wrapped in the enigma of human behavior. And remember, this is just the intermission. The courtroom drama is far from over, and the next act promises more twists, turns, and the ever-present spectre of the unknown. And so we march onward into the chaos that was the Salem witch trials, a tale of intrigue where witches were the least of anyone's worries. Sure, it was a story that would keep the average Puritan up at night, but peel back the layers, and you'll find less of a supernatural thriller and more of a gritty political drama with a hefty side of real estate disputes. Forget about broomsticks and cauldrons. The real magic here was the art of manipulation, power grabs, and a touch of media frenzy. First, let's talk about land. Land, the original root of all evil. In 1692, land wasn't just property. It was status, power, and survival all rolled into one. Owning land meant you had a say in community affairs, a voice in the church, and a seat at the table of local governance. Now, Salem was a town where land disputes were as common as pumpkin spice in autumn. The Putnam and Porter families were two of the power players in this real-life monopoly game, and they didn't exactly see eye to eye. Their feud was less about witches and more about who had the bigger slice of the pie, and they weren't slicing apples for a pie, mind you, but territory. These family rivalries spilled over into the witch trials, like an over-enthusiastic cup of ale. Many of the accused had ties to the Porters, while the accusers were often connected to the Putnams. Coincidence? Hardly. It was a classic case of if you can't beat 'em, accuse 'em of witchcraft. Remember, in a world where the legal system was as sturdy as a sandcastle, an accusation could mean a quick exit for your rival, and a chance to grab their land at a discount. This was more about the power of property than the power of potions. Then there's the delightful concept of fear-mongering. If Salem were a modern-day political campaign, it would be one of those mudslinging affairs with more drama than a season finale. Fear was the currency here, and folks were spending it like there was no tomorrow. Reverend Paris, ever the opportunist, capitalized on this fear to strengthen his grip on the community. He wasn't alone. Others saw the trials as a chance to settle old scores, a convenient way to knock down adversaries and climb the social ladder. In Salem, ambition wore the cloak of righteousness, and church pews were prime seats for plotting. But wait, there's more. Enter the printing press, the 17th century equivalent of Twitter, minus the hashtags. Pamphlets and newsletters spread the witch hysteria far and wide, turning local paranoia into a colony-wide spectacle. Carton Mather, that prolific Puritan minister, penned treatises that added fuel to the fire, describing witches with the fervor of someone recounting a ghost story around a campfire. His works, like Wonders of the Invisible World, were bestsellers in a time when most people were more concerned with farming than flipping pages. Mather's writings painted a picture of a world under siege by the devil's minions, and they spread faster than gossip at a quilting bee. Sure, it's easy to roll our eyes now, but back then, this was serious business. The printing press was the megaphone of its day, amplifying fear and suspicion until it was practically a living, breathing entity. Imagine waking up each morning to find the headlines screaming about witches, dark forces, and invisible threats. It's enough to make anyone double-check the larks and eye their neighbors suspiciously. All this fear, manipulation, and media frenzy brewed a perfect storm where logic went on an extended vacation. The trials weren't just about finding witches. They were about maintaining control in a world teetering on chaos. Religion, politics, and economics collided in a combustible mix, each element fanning the flames of hysteria. It was a power play where truth was less important than the narrative, and the stakes were as high as the gallows. As we sift through the ashes of history, it's clear that the Salem witch trials were less about dark arts and more about the darker sides of human nature. Fear is a powerful motivator, and when combined with a dash of opportunism and a sprinkle of societal stress, it can lead to outcomes more terrifying than any spell. The trials were a cautionary tale of what happens when communities let paranoia rule the day, and they remind us that sometimes the real monsters are the ones we create ourselves. But don't hang up your Puritan hat just yet. There's more to this saga than meets the eye. As we delve deeper into the motivations and machinations behind the trials, we'll uncover more secrets and scandals, the kind that would make even the most seasoned gossip blush. The Salem witch trials were a dark chapter in history, but they're also a mirror reflecting the timeless dance of power, fear, and human folly. So, stay tuned, because the curtain hasn't fallen on this drama just yet. The next act promises even more twists and revelations as we continue to unravel the tangled web of the Salem witch trials. As the dust began to settle on the madness of the Salem witch trials, the folks left standing had quite the daunting task ahead, cleaning up the mess they'd made in their overzealous witch hunt. And let's be real, this wasn't just a little spilled milk. This was an entire dairy's worth of regret. The trials had spiraled into a full-blown debacle, and now the town was left holding the proverbial bag, which, as it turned out, was full of guilt and a fair amount of embarrassment. The first sign that cooler heads might prevail came in October 1692, when Governor William Phipps decided enough was enough. He'd initially been swept up in the witch-hunting fervor, but like someone realizing they've been duped by a particularly persuasive infomercial, Phipps saw the need for damage control. He disbanded the Court of Oyer and Terminer, which, despite its fancy name, was about as fair-minded as a toddler hoarding toys. He replaced it with a more level-headed court that, thankfully, wasn't so keen on spectral evidence and had a bit more of a grip on reality. What followed was a series of pardons and releases for those still languishing in jail. You see, by this point, the prison bill was higher than a kite, and the colony wasn't exactly swimming in cash. It was a classic case of too many witches, not enough funds. The new court, led by the aptly named Superior Court of Judicature, acquitted 49 of the 52 people it tried in 1693. It seemed that cooler heads were finally prevailing, albeit after considerable human cost. But this wasn't just about freeing the prisoners. Salem had a reputation to salvage, and it was clear that a "my bad" just wouldn't cut it. Enter the public apologies. In 1697, the Massachusetts General Court ordered a day of fasting and soul-searching, which, for a bunch of Puritans, wasn't exactly a stretch. Samuel Sewall, one of the trial judges, stood up and did something remarkable. He publicly confessed his error and asked for forgiveness. In true Puritan fashion, this admission was probably as close to a heartfelt apology as you'd get. But hey, it was a start. Society, too, began to evolve in the aftermath. The witch trials exposed the dangers of unchecked power and the perils of mass hysteria. They also highlighted the need for more rigorous legal standards. It was like the colony collectively realized, hey, maybe we shouldn't let ghost stories dictate legal proceedings. The lesson was painful, but it laid the groundwork for a more equitable justice system. Gone were the days when you could accuse someone of witchcraft because your cows stopped producing milk or your bread didn't rise. Fast forward to the early 18th century, and you'll find the Massachusetts legislature passing laws to compensate the victims and their families. It was a bit like trying to put a band-aid on a bullet wound, but the gesture was at least an acknowledgement of wrongdoing. By 1711, the colony had paid a whopping £578 in restitution, a princely sum back then, and a clear sign that they were trying to make amends. Yet, the scars remained, both on the landscape of Salem and in the collective memory of New England. The trials had become a cautionary tale, a dark chapter that served as a stark reminder of where fear and fanaticism can lead. Over time, the narrative of the Salem witch trials transformed into a kind of folklore, a twisted tale of caution that warned against the dangers of groupthink and the peril of unchecked authority. And that's the thing about history. It's a bit like a mirror, reflecting the best and worst of human nature. The Salem witch trials remind us that panic can spread faster than a rumor, and that justice, when clouded by fear, is as elusive as a shadow. The trials remain a case study in how not to handle a crisis, a lesson in the importance of reason over hysteria. In the years that followed, the trials took on a life of their own in the American consciousness. They became a symbol of the dangers inherent in scapegoating and moral panic. The term witch hunt would find new life in the lexicon, used to describe any frenzied quest to root out a perceived enemy, whether real or imagined. In the end, the Salem witch trials leave us with a rich tapestry of lessons, woven from the threads of fear, power, and redemption. They caution us against the seduction of mass hysteria and remind us of the importance of maintaining a just and fair legal system. But most importantly, they serve as a reminder that the line between sanity and madness can be perilously thin, a sobering thought in any age. So, as we look back on this dark chapter, we do so with the understanding that history, much like humanity itself, is a complex beast. It's filled with contradictions, a mix of light and shadow where the past speaks to the present in whispers both cautionary and enlightening. And while the witch trials may belong to a bygone era, their lessons continue to resonate, urging us to tread carefully on the thin ice of fear and suspicion. Stay tuned, because the tale of Salem isn't over yet. There's more to uncover about how these events echo through time, offering insights into who we are and who we might become. As the echoes of history fade, the Salem witch trials remain a peculiar chapter that refuses to be forgotten. It's like the pop culture equivalent of a perennial chart topper, with Salem's legacy cropping up in everything from Halloween decorations to Hollywood blockbusters. Ever since Arthur Miller's The Crucible took to the stage in 1953, the trials have been woven into the fabric of American storytelling. Miller used the witch trials as an allegory for McCarthyism, because let's face it, the parallels between a 1692 witch hunt and a 1950s Red Scare are almost uncanny. Both involve a group of folks convinced they're surrounded by evil spirits or communists with zero chill. Fast forward to today, and you'll find Salem capitalizing on its infamous past like a town that turned its skeletons into a tourist attraction. Annually, around 1 million visitors descend upon this Massachusetts town, eager to walk the cobblestones where paranoia once reigned supreme. The Witch House, the only remaining structure with direct ties to the trials, stands as a monument to those days of dread and delusion. It's ironic, really. A place that was once so gripped by fear now welcomes visitors with open arms and open cash registers. In the realm of dollars and cents, Salem's haunted history is a gold mine. The city rakes in millions each year from tourism, with witch-themed tours, museums, and even a witch dungeon museum offering a taste of the trials drama. This is capitalism at its witchiest, folks. What was once a tragedy is now a marketable tale, proof that time can turn even the darkest chapters into profitable ventures. Yet beneath the broomstick riding kitsch, there's a deeper fascination that keeps people coming back. Why do we have such a thing for witches? It's a question for the ages. Maybe it's the allure of the forbidden, the thrill of the mystical, or simply the human penchant for a good scare. Witches, after all, have been both scapegoat and heroine, villain and victim, depending on the narrative. From the Wicked Witch of the West to Hermione Granger, witches in pop culture run the gamut from terrifying to empowering. They embody the unknown, the misunderstood, and sometimes the downright fabulous. But let's not get too swept up in the charm. Behind the romanticized broomsticks and cauldrons lies a harsher truth. The Salem witch trials were about more than just superstition. They were a reflection of societal tensions and human flaws. Trials were rooted in fear, a primal force that can turn neighbors into enemies and communities into battlegrounds. It's a historical cautionary tale about the dangers of blame-shifting and the seductive power of scapegoating. Even today, the term witch hunt is alive and well, often used to describe any frenzied pursuit of an alleged wrongdoer. In our modern lexicon, it's less about potion brewing and more about political maneuvering. The essence remains: a rush to judgment, community caught in the throes of paranoia. Whether it's a 17th century courtroom or a 21st century tweet storm, the dynamics are eerily similar. And while we're here, let's debunk a myth or two. Contrary to popular belief, not all accused witches in Salem were women. Sure, the trials disproportionately targeted women, highlighting gender biases that made outspoken or independent women particularly vulnerable. But men, too, found themselves accused, showing that the hysteria didn't discriminate completely, just mostly. The trials were less about actual witchcraft and more about control and power dynamics within a stressed community. So, what do the Salem witch trials ultimately teach us? They're a reminder that fear can cloud judgment, and that unchecked power can wreak havoc. In Salem's case, it led to the deaths of 19 people, the ruin of many lives, and a legacy that endures centuries later. It's a story that underscores the importance of due process, the perils of mass hysteria, and the human tendency to look for simple answers to complex problems. In the end, Salem's legacy is both a warning and a curiosity, a blend of history and folklore that continues to captivate. It's a tale of fear, power, and the human urge to find someone to blame when the world feels out of control. Whether you're drawn to the trials for their historical significance or their spooky allure, there's no denying that Salem offers a potent mix of both. As you walk the streets of this New England town, the whispers of the past linger, a reminder that history, much like a good ghost story, never truly vanishes. It's there in the shadows, urging us to remember and reflect. The Salem witch trials may be over, but their lessons continue to haunt us, a spectral reminder of the thin line between reason and madness. And really, isn't that the scariest tale of all? So you find yourself in the bustling heart of ancient Egypt, where the air is thick with ambition and the scent of immortality. You're part of a civilization that's practically obsessed with the afterlife, the land of the living, just a warm-up act for eternity. And who could blame them? Life's a blink compared to forever, right? The pharaohs, those big sharks of the Nile, certainly thought so, and they had a plan. Build tombs that would make even the gods blink. Let's dive into the grand obsession with tomb building, one limestone block at a time. First up, the Egyptians' beliefs were as elaborate as their hieroglyphics. They figured life was just a dress rehearsal for the main event, the afterlife. To them, the soul needed a cushy place to crash for all eternity, surrounded by a lifetime of goodies to ensure comfort, status, and maybe a little bling to keep the neighbors envious. This was no small undertaking. These tombs were like the ancient version of a celebrity mansion, decked out with enough treasures to make any robber drool. But oh, the pharaohs. These guys weren't just thinking about posthumous comfort. No, they were gunning for a kind of eternal glory that would keep their names on everyone's lips for eons. It was like a cosmic PR campaign. Remember the Great Pyramid of Giza? It wasn't just a big pile of rocks. It was a megastructure of epic proportions, demanding 3 million limestone blocks. That's right, 3 million, each weighing between 5 to 15 tons. Just imagine the logistics. It's like trying to organize a festival where every ticket is a boulder. And it wasn't just about stacking stones. The pharaohs wanted these tombs to scream divine. They were the original influencers, crafting narratives that linked their lineage to the gods. If you could pull that off, you weren't just a ruler. You were a deity in human form. Talk about career goals. Let's pause for a moment to consider the economic gymnastics behind these projects. We're talking about a state-sponsored spectacle that required more planning than a modern-day Olympic Games. Every block had to be quarried, transported, and set in place with precision. The workforce was massive, a blend of skilled artisans, laborers, and architects. The whole operation was like a well-oiled machine powered by a relentless pursuit of eternal life. And here's the kicker. It wasn't just about manpower. The pharaohs' quests for immortality were an economic engine, driving trade and innovation. They needed resources, copper tools, food to sustain the workforce, wood for scaffolding, and they got them through a complex network of trade routes. This wasn't just a construction project. It was a nationwide effort that involved everyone from farmers to miners. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, the myth of slave labor. Hollywood loves a good story, but the reality is more nuanced. Many of the workers were skilled laborers, not slaves. They lived in nearby villages, were paid in goods and food, and worked in shifts. Archaeological evidence, like the workers' village at Giza, paints a picture of a community that was well cared for, with access to medical care and food. Sure, the conditions were tough, and the labor was backbreaking, but it wasn't the brutal slave-driven nightmare that some imagine. So, why did this obsession with tombs matter so much? Beyond the quest for personal immortality, these projects were a way for pharaohs to showcase their power and piety. They were statements of dominance, divine favor, and political stability. In a world where the pharaoh was considered a god-king, these colossal tombs were a physical manifestation of their divine right to rule. In the grand scheme of things, these tombs were more than just burial sites. They were the ultimate legacy projects. The pharaohs' names would echo through history, etched in stone and myth, and the people who built them, they were part of a timeless tradition, crafting monuments that would withstand the sands of time. So, as you navigate the dusty streets of ancient Egypt, remember this: each stone in those towering pyramids is a testament to human ambition and the age-old quest for eternal life. It's a story of glory, guards, and greatness, and you're right in the middle of it all. Who knew eternity could be so heavy? Now, as you dodge the metaphorical tumbleweeds of ancient Egypt's sandy streets, let's dive into the everyday grind of the folks who built these timeless tombs. You'd think being part of a workforce responsible for such monumental feats would be akin to a never-ending episode of Extreme Makeover, Afterlife Edition. But it turns out, life in the shadow of the pyramids was more complex than a simple cut-and-dry narrative of slave versus master. In fact, the builders' daily lives reveal a surprising tapestry of ambition, community, and resilience. Let's start with the workforce itself. Picture a diverse crowd that would make a modern-day HR department swoon. We're talking thousands of individuals, from skilled artisans with hands that could carve stone like butter, to seasonal laborers who rolled up their sleeves when the Nile's floods took a break. These workers weren't just anonymous faces in a dusty crowd. They were essential cogs in the grand machinery of Egyptian ambition. Imagine a bustling hive of activity, where the hum of mallets and chisels was the soundtrack, punctuated by the occasional grunt of effort or a shout of direction. Now, contrary to the Hollywood narrative that still lingers like a bad sequel, these workers weren't shackled in chains, driven by the crack of a whip. Nope, they were more like contract employees, compensated with rations that included bread and beer. Because what's a hard day's work under the scorching sun without a cold one, right? Archaeological findings at Giza reveal workers' villages that could rival a small town, complete with bakeries, breweries, and medical facilities. Think of it as an ancient version of a company town, minus the modern amenities, but with all the essentials. And let's talk perks, shall we? These builders enjoyed benefits that would make even today's gig economy workers envious. They had access to medical care, which, for the times, was pretty cutting edge. We're talking splinting broken bones, treating infections with honey's antibacterial properties, and even performing rudimentary surgeries. It wasn't exactly a luxury spa, but it beat the alternative of suffering in silence. Plus, tax breaks were a part of the deal, a clever incentive to keep morale high and chisels sharp. The economic engine behind these projects was a juggernaut. The state sponsored these builders, ensuring a steady flow of resources and sustenance. The sheer scale of logistics involved in feeding, housing, and maintaining such a workforce was like running a marathon with a boulder strapped to your back, impressive and daunting. Yet it worked, thanks to a system that valued efficiency and organization. This wasn't just about stacking stones. It was a symphony of human effort, orchestrated to perfection. Peel back the layers of this grand operation, and you'll find a blend of social and political motivations. For the pharaohs, these projects weren't just about building a swanky afterlife pad. They were a tangible display of power and divine favor. The workers, on the other hand, were more than just laborers. They were participants in a cultural phenomenon, contributing to a legacy that would endure far beyond their mortal years. They were part of something bigger, a narrative that intertwined their daily grind with the eternal aspirations of their rulers. But let's not romanticize it too much. Life wasn't all beer and bread. The conditions were harsh, with sweltering heat, back-breaking tasks, and the ever-present threat of injury. Yet the community they built around these projects was resilient, bound by a shared purpose and a sense of camaraderie. It's a testament to human endurance and adaptability, a reminder that even in the most arduous circumstances, people can forge lives of meaning and connection. So, as we stroll through this ancient landscape, remember that each stone in those towering pyramids is more than just a piece of architecture. It's a symbol of the human spirit's capacity to strive, survive, and thrive. It's a saga of sweat, sunburns, and surprisingly progressive labor practices, nestled in the annals of history. And while the pharaohs may have sought eternity, it's the stories of those who built their dreams that truly endure. As we continue this journey through Egypt's golden sands, keep an eye out for the next chapter of this epic tale. The sands are shifting, and there's more to uncover beneath their timeless veil. As we meander deeper into the dusty corridors of ancient Egypt's construction sites, it's time to tackle the mind-boggling question that keeps archaeologists and armchair historians up at night. How did they shift those colossal stones without a single crane in sight? Spoiler alert, it wasn't magic, but it might as well have been given the ingenuity involved. So let's talk logistics. Picture the Great Pyramid of Giza, that limestone leviathan demanding a whopping 3 million blocks, each one heftier than your average car. Now, forget the idea of slaves dragging these monoliths under a blazing sun, as Hollywood dramas love to depict. The real story, a blend of sledge, ramps, and an extraordinary amount of elbow grease. First, the sledges. Imagine a massive wooden sled, wide enough to cradle a multi-ton block. The Egyptians, being no fools, figured out that dragging these sledges over sand was easier when the sand was wet. A simple splash of water reduced friction significantly, making it possible for teams of workers, sometimes up to 50 strong, to haul these stones with relative ease. It's like the original slip and slide, but with more risk of hernia. Next, the ramps. These weren't your run-of-the-mill slides at a kid's playground. We're talking about architectural marvels that would make even modern engineers nod in appreciation. Theories abound about their construction: straight ramps, zigzagging switchbacks, or even circular spirals wrapping around the pyramid like a boa constrictor. The most popular hypothesis: a long, straight ramp that grew alongside the pyramid as it rose. Some estimates suggest these ramps were up to a mile long, a testament to the Egyptians' commitment to making heavy lifting look easy. But let's not forget the unsung heroes: manpower and teamwork. Imagine thousands of workers, each knowing their role as if part of a giant, sand-dusted orchestra. The coordination was intense, with overseers ensuring the rhythm of the work never faltered. It was more than just brute force. It was a finely tuned machine where every cog, whether human or otherwise, had its place. This was less about moving stones and more about moving mountains, both literally and metaphorically. Now, let's put some numbers on this ancient ledger. How much did these grandiose projects cost? It's a tricky calculation, but historians estimate that the Great Pyramid alone might have taken up to a decade of Egypt's GDP. That's right. One tomb could have cost as much as a small nation's entire economic output for a year. Talk about putting all your eggs in one limestone basket. Who footed the bill for these monumental endeavors? The pharaohs, naturally, but it wasn't just from their deep pockets. The entire state chipped in, transforming these projects into national enterprises. Taxes, tributes, and trade all funneled into a singular goal, creating a stairway to heaven that would outlast the ages. It's like crowdfunding, but instead of a quirky gadget, you get a pyramid, an investment in eternal glory. And what did this mean for Egyptian society? Economically, it was a massive boon, stimulating trade and innovation. The demand for copper tools, wood for scaffolding, and food for the workers created a ripple effect through the economy. Traders, craftsmen, and farmers alike saw their coffers swell, spurred by the insatiable appetite for resources that these projects required. It was like the ultimate government stimulus package, with the added bonus of a shiny new pyramid at the end. But let's not get too starry-eyed. While these projects bolstered the economy, they also strained it. The resources diverted to tomb construction meant less for other state functions, like military campaigns or public works. In times of famine or political instability, the focus on tomb building could seem like a lavish indulgence rather than a wise investment. It was a delicate balancing act, one that required political acumen and a touch of divine luck. So, as we watch these ancient stones being nudged into place, let's remember the dual nature of these endeavors. On one hand, they were about the pharaoh's quest for immortality, a narrative of divine destiny chiseled into the earth. On the other, they were economic engines, driving trade and innovation while straining the limits of what a civilization could achieve. It's a story of ambition, audacity, and a touch of madness, a saga that continues to captivate us, even as the sands of time shift around its foundations. And as we prepare to explore further into the lives of those who wielded chisels and carried stone, keep in mind the ongoing dance between legend and reality. The pyramids stand not just as monuments to the dead, but as testaments to the living, those who dared to reach for the sky, and in doing so, etch their place in history. Stay tuned, because this epic tale of glory, grit, and granite is far from over. Now, as the desert sun blazes overhead, it's time to explore the grittier side of pyramid building, where ambition meets adversity in a showdown of epic proportions. You see, the grandeur of these ancient projects came with a hefty price tag beyond mere gold and grain. The human cost was as monumental as the structures themselves. First up, let's talk about the weather. Egypt might have that postcard-perfect image of endless sunshine, but when you're laboring under the relentless sun with no SPF 50 in sight, it's less paradise and more punishment. Workers faced scorching heat that could melt resolve faster than butter on a hot skillet. Dehydration was a constant threat, with temperatures often soaring above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. It was like working in a giant sauna, minus the relaxation, and with a lot more heavy lifting. But wait, there's more. Besides the sweltering heat, the Nile's annual flooding was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it provided fertile land and resources. On the other, it turned construction sites into muddy quagmires, stalling progress and straining resources. Imagine trying to build a pyramid while your workforce is knee-deep in silt. It's like trying to erect a skyscraper during a hurricane, frustrating and fraught with danger. Speaking of danger, let's not gloss over the accidents. With tons of stone being moved by sheer manpower, mishaps were inevitable. Archaeological finds reveal that broken bones and crushed limbs were part and parcel of the job. Imagine a workday where dodging falling rocks was just another occupational hazard. And while there were rudimentary medical practices, treating a crushed foot wasn't exactly a walk in the park. Honey and herbs could only do so much when a multi-ton block decided to make your leg its new resting place. Then there were the political upheavals. The same pharaohs who commissioned these grand projects were sometimes overthrown faster than you can say dynastic drama. A change in leadership could halt construction or even redirect resources to more pressing matters, like quelling rebellions or fortifying borders. This wasn't just a project, it was a political statement. And when the political winds shifted, so did the focus and funding of these monumental endeavors. Now, let's add some human touch to this saga of sweat and stone. Despite the adversities, the builders weren't just anonymous laborers. They were fathers, sons, and brothers, people with stories and struggles. They coped with the pressures through a mix of camaraderie and resilience. Living in tightly knit communities, they supported each other through hardships, sharing bread, beer, and tales of the day's toil. It was a social fabric woven from shared experiences and mutual dependence. Yet, amidst this camaraderie, the human cost was undeniable. Life expectancy was lower for those in the thick of construction, with many succumbing to injuries or disease. It's a stark reminder that while the pyramids were built to immortalize the pharaohs, the builders faced the harsh reality of mortality every day. They labored under the shadow of the very tombs that promised eternal life for someone else. But don't despair just yet. Archaeological records, like those found at Deir el-Medina, show that these workers weren't completely left to fend for themselves. They had access to medical facilities, and there are records of compensation for workers injured on the job. It's a glimpse into an early form of workers' rights, albeit one wrapped in the complexities of ancient societal norms. Despite everything, the builders found ways to cope with the relentless grind. Some turned to religion, seeking comfort in the afterlife, promises that their labor would help secure. Others found solace in the simple pleasures of daily life, sharing meals, telling stories, and perhaps grumbling about the foreman's latest decree. It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, finding light even in the shadow of monolithic ambition. So, as we stand in awe of these ancient marvels, let's not forget the unsung heroes who faced the elements, accidents, and upheavals to make them a reality. Their story is one of perseverance against the odds, a reminder that even the grandest dreams require a foundation built on human effort and endurance. These pyramids, these testaments to eternity, were not just stone and mortar. They were built on the backs of those who dared to dream of something bigger, even as they faced the harshness of their own reality. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the tapestry of history, exploring the lives and legacies of those who shaped the sands of time. There's more to this story, and the desert is still whispering secrets waiting to be uncovered. While the desert whispers secrets of ancient ambition, let's turn our gaze to the towering pyramids and tombs that these builders left behind, monuments that have outlasted empires and continue to captivate the imagination of the world. You see, these structures are more than mere piles of stone. They're the ultimate testaments to human tenacity, ambition, and perhaps a touch of megalomania. First things first, let's talk legacy. The pyramids, especially the Great Pyramid of Giza, are among the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and for good reason. Built around 2560 BCE during the reign of Pharaoh Khufu, it's the only wonder still standing. For perspective, that's like if the original iPhone was still the hardest gadget around today. The sheer longevity of these structures is mind-boggling. They've seen the rise and fall of civilizations, survived earthquakes, invasions, and even Napoleon's army. Talk about being built to last. But why do they matter so much? These colossal constructions aren't just relics of a bygone era. They were blueprints for future generations. The architectural techniques pioneered by the Egyptians influenced everything from the Roman Colosseum to modern skyscrapers. The pyramids were the original flex, showing the world what human beings could achieve when they put their minds and backs to it. Now, let's dive into the economic and cultural ripple effects. The pyramids were not just about eternal glory. They were economic engines. The need for resources to build these structures spurred trade networks that stretched across the ancient world. Copper from Sinai, cedar from Lebanon, and gold from Nubia all found their way into Egypt, fueling a bustling economy. It was like an ancient version of globalization, minus the Wi-Fi. These tombs also served as cultural beacons. They were museums before museums were cool, housing art, hieroglyphics, and treasures that told the story of Egypt's past. They inspired travelers, historians, and conquerors alike. Remember Alexander the Great. When he rolled into Egypt in 332 BCE, he was so impressed by the pyramids that he decided to throw a city of his own into the mix, Alexandria. Even Napoleon couldn't resist their allure, though he did try to blow one up. Thankfully, he failed, and the pyramids lived to tell the tale. But let's fast forward to today, where the pyramids are still pulling their weight, literally. Every year, millions of tourists flock to Egypt, eager to snap selfies with these ancient giants. In 2019 alone, Egypt welcomed over 13 million visitors, with the pyramids being a top attraction. That's a lot of plane tickets, hotel rooms, and souvenir camel figurines. The tourism industry is a massive part of Egypt's economy, with the pyramids at its heart, generating billions in revenue. Yet, while the pyramids stand as a testament to human achievement, they also remind us of our limits. The ancient Egyptians built these structures to last forever, but even they couldn't escape the ravages of time. Erosion, looting, and pollution have taken their toll. It's a humbling reminder that while we can strive for immortality, we're still at the mercy of nature's whims. Now, what can these ancient architects teach us about modern life? For starters, their story is a masterclass in human resilience and ingenuity. Despite working with rudimentary tools and under harsh conditions, they created something that has endured for millennia. It's a lesson in perseverance, in dreaming big and daring to turn those dreams into reality. But let's not gloss over the human cost. The pyramids remind us that greatness often comes at a price. Builders faced back-breaking labor, harsh conditions, and political upheaval. It's a nod to the complexities of progress, where ambition and sacrifice often dance a precarious waltz. As we wrap up this journey through ancient Egypt, let's take a moment to reflect on the dual nature of these monuments. Their stories etched in stone, a blend of romance and reality. On one hand, they embody the grandeur of human ambition, a quest for eternity that transcends time and space. On the other, they're a testament to the gritty, often harsh realities faced by those who dared to dream of something greater. So next time you find yourself gazing at a towering skyscraper, remember the lessons of the pyramids. They're not just about reaching for the sky, but about the ground beneath your feet, the people, stories, and sacrifices that make the impossible possible. In the end, the pyramids aren't just about the pharaohs or the gods they sought to emulate. They're about us, the dreamers and doers who, despite the odds, continue to build, strive, and leave our mark on the world. And there you have it, a journey through time, stone, and human spirit. May these stories inspire you to reach for your own pyramids, whatever they may be. Until next time, keep your eyes on the stars and your feet firmly planted on the ground. The sands of time may shift, but the stories endure, waiting to be rediscovered by those brave enough to venture into history's vast expanse. In the summer of 1812, you found yourself in the middle of one of history's most audacious military adventures. Napoleon Bonaparte, the self-declared Emperor of the French, has decided to take a little stroll into Russia. Well, when I say stroll, I mean leading a behemoth of an army, over 600,000 men strong, across the vast expanses of Eastern Europe. To put that into perspective, that's enough people to fill the largest stadiums today, twice over. It's a logistical nightmare that makes organizing a family road trip look like a cakewalk. Napoleon's Grande Armée is a marvel of its time, a multinational force drawn from every corner of his empire. French, Italians, Poles, Germans, and even some Spanish, though probably not too thrilled about it. They're all marching together under the watchful eye of Napoleon, a man whose ego could occupy a small country all by itself. And while he's conquered much of Europe with his lightning-fast campaigns, Russia's a different beast altogether. You see, Napoleon's not just relying on sheer numbers. He's got a plan, or at least he thinks he does. The idea is to crush the Russian army swiftly, forcing Tsar Alexander I to the negotiating table. Simple, right? Except, spoiler alert, things don't go quite as planned. The Russians, with their vast, unforgiving landscape, have a few tricks up their sleeves, too. First, we need to talk about supply lines. Feeding and equipping over 500,000 men is no small feat. It's like trying to run a 24/7 buffet for a city on the move. Napoleon's army carries with it an immense baggage train, thousands of wagons filled with food, ammunition, and medical supplies. But here's the kicker. The further they march, the longer and more fragile these supply lines become. It's like trying to keep a garden hose from kinking when it's stretched a mile long. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, or should I say, the bear, the Russian winter. Everyone talks about it like it's some mythical beast waiting to pounce. But in the summer of 1812, that chill is the last thing on anyone's mind. Napoleon's more concerned about the Russian resistance, or lack thereof, as he initially believes. After all, he's Napoleon. He's used to his opponents folding like a cheap suit. But the Russians aren't playing by his rules. As the Grande Armée marches deeper into Russian territory, they find villages deserted, fields burned, and supplies scarce. It's a tactic known as scorched earth, and it's a brutal, effective strategy that leaves Napoleon's men hungry and frustrated. The Russians are retreating, drawing Napoleon further into the country, and it's here we see the first cracks in his grand plan. And let's not forget the importance, or, ironically, the complete oversight, of weather forecasting. In the 19th century, predicting the weather was about as reliable as a magic 8-ball. Napoleon, ever the optimist, gambles that he can achieve a quick victory before the cold sets in. But as any gambler will tell you, sometimes the house wins. The initial successes come quickly enough. Napoleon scores a few victories against the Russian army, but they're costly and not decisive. It's the military equivalent of winning a few skirmishes in a game of Risk while your opponent quietly builds strength on the other side of the board. The French capture Smolensk in August, but it's a hollow victory. The city is in ruins, and the Russians are still very much in the fight. As the weeks pass, ominous signs begin to loom. The days grow shorter, the nights colder, supplies are running low, and morale starts to wane. It's like being on a sinking ship, but keeping your fingers crossed that land is just over the horizon. Napoleon presses on towards Moscow, convinced that capturing the Russian capital will end the war. But Moscow is over 280 kilometers from Smolensk, and every step taken further stretches the already strained supply lines. So here you are, a soldier in Napoleon's army, trudging through the endless Russian steppe. You're wearing a uniform that's seen better days. Your stomach growls louder than a bear in spring, and whispers about the coming winter are growing louder. It's a race against time, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Napoleon's confidence is infectious, but even he can't ignore the clouds gathering on the horizon. The myth of the invincible Napoleon is about to face a harsh reality check, and as part of his Grande Armée, you're right in the thick of it. The march into Russia was supposed to be a swift, decisive campaign. Instead, it's turning into a grim march towards the unknown. With every step, the challenges grow, and the question lingers. Will Napoleon's gamble pay off, or is he leading his army into disaster? Stay tuned, because the story's just getting started. The Russian campaign was supposed to be Napoleon's crowning glory, but what it became was the world's most miserable reality check. As you trudge through the alien landscape of the Russian steppe, the terrain shifts from a battlefield to a test of survival. The endless plains are a monotonous expanse, stretching on like a bad decision that you can't take back. It's September now, and the chill in the air is more than just a whisper of what's to come. It's a full-throated warning. Let's talk temperatures, because they're about to become a huge deal. By late November, the mercury plunges to a bone-chilling -30 degrees Celsius. That's the kind of cold that doesn't just nip at your nose, but takes a full bite out of your sanity. Your uniform, already threadbare from months of campaigning, offers about as much protection as a soggy newspaper. The soldiers, many of whom have never seen snow, are ill-prepared for this Arctic onslaught. Napoleon had banked on a swift victory, not a long, drawn-out engagement with Mother Nature herself. But here's a reality check. The weather is just one piece of this disastrous puzzle. The lack of proper winter clothing is another nail in the coffin. Napoleon's army didn't pack for a Siberian getaway, and it's painfully obvious. While you might think the Emperor of the French would have a contingency plan, the truth is, his logistics were stretched thinner than a Parisian crate. Over 600,000 troops started this journey, and by the time the frost sets in, numbers are dwindling like patients at the DMV. By December, the Grande Armée is reduced to a shivering, starving shell of its former self. And speaking of starving, the supply lines are a disaster. You remember that garden hose analogy? Well, it's kinked, tangled, and utterly useless. The scorched earth strategy employed by the Russians means that foraging is a fool's errand. Imagine trying to find a sandwich in a barren wasteland, and you'll get the idea. Hunger gnaws at the soldiers as insidiously as the cold. Rations, when available, are meager: stale bread, salted meat that's more salt than meat, and the occasional horse if you're lucky. It's a culinary experience that makes airplane food look gourmet. But hold your horses, literally, because there's more to this grim picture. Disease runs rampant through the ranks. Typhus, dysentery, and other delightful maladies spread like gossip at a royal court, thinning the troops faster than any battle could. With inadequate medical supplies and exhausted doctors, the army becomes a walking infirmary. The myth that the Russian winter single-handedly crushed Napoleon's forces makes for a dramatic tale, but the truth is far more nuanced. It's like blaming a single raindrop for a flood. Morale, predictably, is at rock bottom. The once mighty Grande Armée, buoyed by Napoleon's charisma and previous victories, is now a ragtag group of survivalists. Desertions increase as men slip away into the night, hoping against hope for a better fate. To add insult to injury, the Russians employ hit-and-run tactics, harassing the weary soldiers like mosquitoes at a summer picnic. Every skirmish saps strength and spirit, a constant reminder that the enemy is as relentless as the cold. The situation is further compounded by the sheer exhaustion of the men, marching for months with little rest. Their bodies are worn down to the bone. The human spirit is resilient, but even it has limits. With each step, the dream of glory fades, replaced by the grim reality of survival. It's a dark irony that Napoleon's ambition has led to this, a once invincible army now brought low by forces beyond its control. So there you have it. The brutal winter may be the headline act, but disease, starvation, and exhaustion are the supporting cast in this tragic play. The Russian campaign has become an exercise in endurance, a harsh lesson in hubris, and a testament to the unpredictability of war. Napoleon, the man who once seemed to bend Europe to his will, is now facing the immutable laws of nature. And as you march on through the snow, each step heavier than the last, you can't help but wonder if this is the end of the line for the Grande Armée. Stay tuned, because the story's got more twists and turns than a Russian winter road. As you trudge onward through the snow, each step heavier than the last, it becomes clear that the Grande Armée is more of a tragic caravan than a conquering force. Napoleon's army, once the pride of Europe, is now a disheveled parade of misery. The strategic retreat from Moscow, if you can call it strategic, resembles a chaotic scramble for survival. Russian forces, led by General Mikhail Kutuzov, shadow them like a cat playing with its prey, always within striking distance, yet never pouncing fully. It's a psychological game, and the Russians are winning. Now, let's talk about the Berezina River, that infamous strip of icy water that sounds more like a name for a fancy cocktail than a historical nightmare. But trust me, this is no party. By late November 1812, Napoleon's forces reached the Berezina, a name that would soon be etched in infamy. The crossing of this river is often romanticized as a last-ditch display of tactical genius, but the reality, it's a logistical calamity of epic proportions. Picture the scene. The river is partially frozen, a treacherous mix of ice and slush. Napoleon's engineers, improvising like MacGyver on a bad day, scramble to build makeshift bridges. They use whatever materials are on hand, wood from dismantled wagons, beams from nearby structures. It's a marvel of human ingenuity, sure, but it's also a testament to sheer desperation. The cold bites harder than a creditor at the end of the month, and every misstep means a plunge into icy waters that promise a swift, frigid end. Amidst this chaos, Napoleon orders a diversion to mislead the Russians, sending them on a wild goose chase while his troops attempt the crossing. The plan works, but only just. The bridges are narrow, and the soldiers cross in a disorganized torrent, clinging to life with every step. Primary accounts from the time paint a grim picture. French officer Philippe Paul de Ségur described it as a scene of indescribable horror, with men, horses, and wagons all jumbled together in a desperate throng. Numbers don't lie, and here they spell catastrophe. Of the roughly 50,000 troops that approached the Berezina, only about 40,000 made it across. The rest, lost to the elements, the enemy, or the river itself. It's a grim reminder that not all casualties of war fall to bullets and bayonets. Sometimes it's the environment itself that takes the deadliest toll. The myth of a heroic retreat is seductive, sure. Who doesn't love a good underdog story, where the plucky hero turns the tables at the last minute? But the reality is far from romantic. This retreat is a tale of exhaustion, starvation, and the indomitable will to survive against impossible odds. It's not about glory, it's about grit, the kind that leaves scars on both body and soul. Napoleon himself, usually so composed, shows cracks in his armor, literal and figurative. His famous cocked hat and grey coat are all that remain of his imperial splendor. That, and his unyielding willpower, which somehow keeps him going. He's a study in contrasts. A leader who's both lionized and vilified, a man whose ambition knows no bounds, yet whose judgment is, at times, fatally flawed. The retreat from Moscow is often painted as a single event, but it's more like a tapestry of tragedies, each thread woven with hardship and heartache. Disease, hunger, and the relentless Russian assaults continue to whittle down the army's numbers. By the time they limp across the Berezina, the Grand Armée is a shadow of its former self, numbering around 20,000 effective soldiers. The rest are lost to history, forgotten footnotes in a grand narrative of hubris and human endurance. Economically, the campaign is a disaster of spectacular proportions. Napoleon's costly gamble leaves France's coffers as depleted as the spirits of its soldiers. The invasion and retreat cost over 400,000 lives, a staggering number that underscores the human cost of imperial ambition. The economic strain reverberates through the empire, weakening Napoleon's grip on power and setting the stage for his eventual downfall. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. As the army stumbles onward, the legend of the Berezina crossing begins to take shape. It's a story told and retold, growing with each telling, until it becomes a symbol of resilience and resourcefulness. In reality, it's less about tactical brilliance and more about survival by any means necessary. The myth might shine bright, but the truth is buried beneath layers of frost and forgotten bodies. As you soldier on, the landscape around you changes from snow-covered fields to haunting silhouettes of trees, stripped bare by the cold. It's a stark reminder that nature, indifferent and immutable, remains the ultimate arbiter of fate. The Grand Armée, once the epitome of military might, is now at the mercy of elements it cannot command. So there you have it, the Berezina, a place where legends are born and harsh realities collide. It's a crucible of courage and chaos, where the human spirit is tested to its limits. As Napoleon's army makes its way west, the journey is far from over. The road ahead is fraught with danger, and the spectre of defeat looms ever larger. Stay tuned, because this tale of ambition, hubris, and survival has plenty more turns to take. As Napoleon's battered forces clatter westward, the reverberations of their disastrous Russian sojourn ripple across Europe like a seismic wave. The Berezina crossing might be behind them, But the consequences of this colossal blunder are just beginning to unfold, and boy, are they going to be messy. Let's start with the economic toll, shall we? Napoleon's Russian escapade is a financial fiasco so grand that it makes modern budget overruns look like pocket change. Imagine a national treasury as a fine wine collection, meticulously built over years of conquest and cunning. The Russian campaign, however, is akin to throwing a wild party and smashing every bottle. We're talking about a military misadventure that cost France not only its resources, but also its manpower, over 400,000 soldiers, to be precise. That's akin to wiping out the entire population of a respectable-sized city. The human and financial hemorrhaging leaves Napoleon's empire teetering like a tipsy tightrope walker at the circus. Now, onto Napoleon himself. The man who once seemed to possess the Midas touch now finds his golden reputation tarnished. The Russian campaign is a public relations disaster, and you thought celebrities had it rough on social media. In the court of public opinion, Napoleon's image takes a nosedive faster than a souffle in a thunderstorm. No longer the infallible military genius, he becomes a man whose ambition has outpaced his judgment. Think of it like a rock star who's just released a dud album. His fans are worried, and his critics are gleefully sharpening their pens. Politically, the repercussions are just as severe. Napoleon had built an empire on the back of alliances and a bit of good old-fashioned arm-twisting. But those allies, they're starting to look at France like a sinking ship, and rats are scurrying for the lifeboats. The once fearsome Napoleonic coalition begins to unravel as European powers smell blood in the water. It's like a game of Risk, where everyone suddenly decides to team up against the player who's been hogging all the continents. Austria, Prussia, and even former allies like Bavaria start eyeing the exit, while Russia, Britain, and a host of others plot to topple the French giant. The power dynamics in Europe are shifting like tectonic plates, and Napoleon is caught in the middle of the fault line. But wait, there's more. Enter propaganda, the 19th century equivalent of a Twitter war. Napoleon, ever the master of public image, has long used propaganda to his advantage, presenting himself as the hero of the people and the scourge of tyrants. But this time, the narrative slips out of his control. European powers seize the opportunity to paint him as a reckless warmonger, a man whose dreams of glory have led to ruin. It's a masterclass in spin, and the anti-Napoleon rhetoric spreads faster than a juicy piece of gossip at Versailles. Pamphlets, newspapers, and word of mouth all play their part in reshaping the narrative. The myth of Napoleon as an invincible leader is crumbling, replaced by a more complex and less flattering portrait. Yet amid the chaos, there are lessons to be learned. Or are there? Napoleon, ever the stubborn strategist, seems determined to double down rather than admit defeat. It's the gambler's fallacy on a grand scale, convinced that one more roll of the dice will turn his luck around. His contemporaries, meanwhile, are taking notes on the perils of overreach. The Russian campaign becomes a cautionary tale for military leaders, a stark reminder that even the most powerful empires can be brought low by hubris and harsh winters. It's the historical equivalent of a what-not-to-do list, complete with footnotes and cautionary tales. So where does this leave us? With a Europe on the brink of transformation, a France grappling with the fallout of ambition gone awry, and a Napoleon whose legacy hangs in the balance. The stage is set for further drama, and the next act promises to be a doozy. As the dust settles and the snow melts, the consequences of this ill-fated campaign will continue to unfold, shaping the future of a continent and the course of history itself. Stay tuned, because this saga of ambition, folly, and survival is far from over, and the echoes of its lessons will reverberate through time. As Napoleon's misadventure in Russia fades into the frosty annals of history, the echoes of its consequences reverberate far beyond the immediate aftermath. What was meant to be a swift, decisive campaign instead morphs into a cautionary tale of epic proportions, a testament to the age-old truth that pride truly does come before a fall. You know, like biting into an apple only to find half a worm. Let's talk legacy, shall we? The Russian campaign of 1812 is often romanticized in cultural memory, painted as a grand narrative of heroism and tragedy, a Shakespearean epic set against a backdrop of icy desolation. It's a story that captivates the imagination, where Napoleon, the tragic hero, is undone by forces greater than himself. But let's peel back the layers of legend and look at the cold, hard facts. This was a logistical, strategic, and human disaster on a colossal scale. Over 400,000 soldiers lost, many more wounded or captured, and a once mighty army reduced to a ragtag band of survivors. It's like watching your favorite sports team go from champions to utter defeat in a single disastrous season. Financially, the campaign was a monumental blunder. The cost was astronomical, draining the French treasury and leaving the empire in dire economic straits. Imagine a bill that doesn't just break the bank, but utterly demolishes it, because that's what happened to France's coffers. Napoleon's grand designs were built on the shaky foundation of borrowed money and unsustainable ambition. The economic strain would ripple through the empire, weakening Napoleon's hold on power and setting the stage for more upheaval. Politically, the campaign shattered the myth of Napoleon's invincibility. European powers, once cowed by his military prowess, now saw him as vulnerable. The Russian campaign showed that he was not the unstoppable force he once seemed, but a man capable of making catastrophic errors. It's like realizing the Wizard of Oz is just a man behind a curtain, disillusioning, to say the least. This realization emboldened his enemies, and the alliances he had so meticulously crafted began to crumble. The Sixth Coalition, formed in 1813, would rally against him with renewed vigor, eager to capitalize on his weakened state. But what about the man himself, the Emperor of the French? Napoleon returned to Paris with his tail between his legs, his reputation in tatters. Yet, in true Napoleonic fashion, he refused to acknowledge the full extent of his failure. His hubris, once a driving force behind his success, now blinded him to the reality of his situation. It's the classic tale of flying too close to the sun, and he was about to get burned. Even after such a colossal misstep, Napoleon remained defiant, convinced that he could still reclaim his former glory. Culturally, the Russian campaign has been immortalized in art, literature, and music, adding a veneer of romance to its grim reality. Works like Tolstoy's *War and Peace*, and Tchaikovsky's *1812 Overture*, have ensured that the story remains in the public consciousness, often glossing over the harsh truths. It's the Hollywood treatment of history, where the gritty details are airbrushed away, leaving behind a more palatable narrative. But beneath the layers of myth lies the sobering reality of war's brutality and the hubris that drives men to chase impossible dreams. As we reflect on the enduring legacy of Napoleon's Russian debacle, it's hard not to see parallels with other moments in history. Time and again, leaders have failed to learn from past mistakes, convinced that they can succeed where others have faltered. It's a cycle as predictable as it is tragic, a reminder that those who ignore history are doomed to repeat it. The Russian campaign serves as a stark warning against the dangers of overreach and the illusion of invincibility. In the end, Napoleon's Russian campaign was a lesson in the limits of human ambition and the power of nature to humble even the greatest of men. It was a reminder that no matter how grand our plans, the world has a way of reminding us of our place within it. As the story of 1812 fades into the background, it leaves behind a legacy of cautionary tales, a testament to the dangers of unchecked ambition and the unpredictable nature of fate. So, there you have it. The Russian campaign is a saga that continues to resonate, a chilling reminder of what happens when ambition outpaces reality. It's a story that will be retold, reimagined, and revisited, its lessons echoing through the corridors of history as long as there are those willing to listen. And as you ponder the legacy of Napoleon's ill-fated march into Russia, remember this. In the grand tapestry of history, every thread, no matter how frayed, contributes to the larger picture. And that, my friend, is a tale worth remembering. So you're a Victorian child, and it's the 19th century. Life's a bit different. Think less tick-tock, more ticking of the factory clock. You're not off to school with a shiny new pencil case. Oh no, you're off to the factory, where you'll spend the next 12 to 16 hours of your day. Yes, that's right. A full day in modern parlance, all before the age of 10. Forget about recess and lunchtime. Your breaks are more like, rest your eyes for a second, before getting back to operating dangerous machinery. Now, you might be wondering why you're in this Dickensian nightmare. forced to work when you should be playing hopscotch or chasing hoops down cobblestone streets. Well, it's the Industrial Revolution, my friend. A time of great technological advancement and economic growth, but also a time when children were seen as the perfect workforce. Cheap, compliant, and able to crawl under machines to fix them, because why not capitalize on your small size, right? Your nimble fingers are just perfect for maneuvering between those spinning jennies and power looms. The stats are shocking. By the mid-1800s, over 30% of the workforce in Britain's textile factories were under the age of 18. Some as young as 5. Yes, 5, were thrust into the labor force. The hours. Brutal. We're talking about a 12 to 16-hour workday, 6 days a week. Sundays were your day off, but not really a day for cartoons and cereal. More like a day to collapse from exhaustion. And let's talk money, or the lack thereof. You weren't raking in the big bucks. In fact, you were raking in almost nothing. You'd earn a pittance, maybe a shilling a week if you were lucky. That's about the cost of a loaf of bread, or, in today's terms, barely enough to buy a packet of gum. This was an era where child labor was not only accepted, but expected. Families often depended on every member, no matter how young, to contribute financially. The survival of the family unit often meant sacrificing the well-being of its youngest members. Now, let's tackle a popular myth. The rosy-cheeked, merry factory child skipping home at the end of a fruitful day. It sounds quaint, almost pastoral, doesn't it? The reality, however, is far from this romanticized imagery. Conditions were grim. Factories were dark, damp, and dangerous. The air was thick with dust and smoke, making it hard to breathe, let alone work. Accidents were common, with children losing fingers or worse. The noise was deafening, a cacophony of clanking and clattering that would leave your ears ringing long after you'd left the premises. Enter the 1833 Factory Act, the supposed savior of exploited child workers. The act aimed to improve conditions by restricting working hours for children aged 9 to 13 to a measly 9 hours a day, while those aged 14 to 18 could work up to 12 hours. It also required factory owners to ensure children received 2 hours of schooling each day. Noble intentions, but in practice, more like a paper tiger. Enforcement was lax, with factory owners either ignoring the laws altogether or finding clever ways to dodge them. Inspectors were few and far between, often bribed to turn a blind eye. So, while the law sounded great on paper, it was more of a suggestion than a mandate. Why did these laws fail so spectacularly? It boils down to economics and the laissez-faire attitude of the time. The Industrial Revolution wasn't just a technological boom. It was an economic juggernaut, and children were its fuel. Factory owners weren't keen on losing their cheap labor force, and the government was hesitant to intervene too harshly. After all, the economic boom was lining a lot of pockets, even if the kids had to sacrifice their childhoods. But hang on, you might wonder, what about school? Shouldn't children be learning their ABCs and not how to operate a spinning mule? Compulsory education was barely a blip on the radar in 1833. It wouldn't be until the 1870 Education Act that schooling became mandatory for children aged 5 to 13. Even then, the enforcement was patchy, and many children continued to work in factories, mines, and mills to support their families. As you lay there in your cramped bed at night, muscles aching and ears still buzzing from the day's toil, you might dream of a different life. Perhaps one where childhood doesn't mean labor, and education is a right, not a privilege. But for now, that's just a dream, waiting for society to catch up with the ideals of childhood innocence and the importance of education. So there you have it, the not-so-glamorous life of a Victorian child laborer. It's a tale of economic necessity, societal norms, and legal loopholes. No quaint rosy-cheeked children here, just the cold, hard truth of industrial progress at the expense of childhood. But enough with the bedtime ruminations. Let's snap back to reality, or what passed for it in the Victorian era. The whistle blows, and you're back in the thick of it. The factory floor isn't just a place, it's a symphony of chaos. Machines whir and clatter in a relentless rhythm, each note a reminder of your small place in this industrial opera. You're not just punching a clock. You're part of a system that prizes efficiency over empathy. Let's talk specifics. In the textile factories, you're likely operating a spinning jenny or power loom. Machines so loud and fast, they make roller coasters look like merry-go-rounds. And the pay? Abysmal. On average, a child might earn about 5 to 10 shillings a week, which today translates to roughly 20 to 40 pounds. That's pocket change compared to the profits these factories raked in, but enough to keep your family just shy of destitution. It's a dirty little economic engine where your impoverished labor funds the societal elite's opulence. Now, brace yourself, because Victorian coal mines make factories look like daycare. Imagine descending into a dark, suffocating pit where the air is thicker than your great-aunt's gravy. The work was brutal, especially for children, who were often employed as trappers. That's a fancy term for sitting in pitch blackness, opening and closing ventilation doors for passing coal carts. For this splendid privilege, you'd earn a few pennies a day. A child's nimble frame was perfect for these cramped spaces, and their small hands adept at sorting through coal. It's a job that makes assembling IKEA furniture seem like a spa day. Accidents were a grim reality. In 1842, the Children's Employment Commission reported numerous cases of children suffering from lung diseases, crushed limbs, and burns. The mines were so hazardous that they make today's reality TV look like a walk in the park. And let's not forget the explosions. Methane gas, fondly known as fire damp, could ignite with the slightest spark, turning the mine into a hellish inferno. It's a miracle any child survived to tell the tale. And yet, despite these horrors, Victorian society loved to paint a picture of the idyllic family. The parlor room, the piano, the warm hearth, all symbols of domestic bliss. But this was a fantasy reserved for the well-to-do, a dream as inaccessible to the working-class child as the moon. For them, the family unit was more economic engine than emotional sanctuary. Every member, no matter how young, played their part in keeping the household afloat. The lines between family and factory blurred, with home life often mirroring the relentless grind of labor. So where did these romantic myths come from? Well, Victorian literature loved a good sob story, and nothing tugs at the heartstrings like a plucky child overcoming adversity. Enter Charles Dickens, the era's master storyteller, who gave us Oliver Twist and his merry band of misfit orphans. While his tales highlighted social injustices, they also perpetuated the myth of the resilient, cheerful child laborer. But let's be real. Life was less about heartwarming resilience and more about sheer survival. As you navigate this world, you start to notice how things are rigged against you. The law, the economy, even society's expectations all conspire to keep you in your place. The 1833 Factory Act, for example, was more of a PR stunt than a genuine reform. Sure, it limited child labor hours, but with enforcement as flimsy as a Victorian corset, it hardly made a dent. Factory owners simply fudged records or bribed inspectors, ensuring that little changed on the ground. Now, you might wonder why there wasn't more public outcry. The truth is, many people were too busy reaping the benefits of industrial progress to bother with its collateral damage. Economic growth was the golden goose, and nobody wanted to kill it, even if it meant turning a blind eye to the multitude of child workers. After all, the Victorian era was a time of contrasts. It was an age of enlightenment and exploitation, of progress and poverty. Society was evolving, but at a pace that left its youngest members in the dust. As you clock out, exhausted and aching, you might catch a glimpse of the boss, his pockets lined with the fruits of your labor. It's a stark reminder of the economic divide that defines your existence. You might dream of a life where work doesn't begin before the sun rises or end long after it sets. But for now, you're stuck in this Dickensian nightmare, waiting for the world to catch up with the ideals of childhood innocence and the importance of education. And there you have it, another day in the life of a Victorian child laborer. It's a tale of economic necessity and societal indifference, wrapped in the grim realities of industrial progress. No quaint, rosy-cheeked children here, just the cold, hard truth of a world where childhood was sacrificed on the altar of economic growth. But fear not, change is on the horizon, and the story doesn't end here. Stay tuned, because the winds of reform are starting to stir, and the next chapter is just around the corner. As the winds of reform begin to stir, let's talk about the societal attitudes that kept child labor chugging along like a runaway steam engine. Imagine a world where the mantra "work builds character" was practically the national anthem. The Victorians were firm believers in this notion, convinced that a hard day's labor was the secret source to a virtuous life. Forget about building sandcastles. Building character meant dodging industrial accidents and breathing in soot. Now, these attitudes didn't just pop out of nowhere. They were a cocktail of economic necessity, cultural values, and a dash of good old-fashioned denial. The Industrial Revolution was like a massive game of economic Jenga, and nobody wanted to be the one to pull the block that sent it all crashing down. So, instead of addressing the grim reality, society spun a narrative where child labor was not just necessary but beneficial. Enter the myth of the industrious child, a tale as appealing as it was delusional. But let's get down to brass tacks. The belief that work was character building conveniently ignored the harsh realities faced by these pint-sized laborers. We're talking about a generation where literacy rates were as low as the factory basements they toiled in. By the mid-19th century, only about 20% of working-class kids received any formal education. That's right, a whopping 80% were left to figure out life without the luxury of reading, writing, or arithmetic. It's like trying to navigate a minefield blindfolded. Good luck with that. And what about those 2 hours of schooling mandated by the 1833 Factory Act? In theory, it sounded noble, but in practice, it was about as effective as a chocolate teapot. Factory owners, ever the crafty operators, either ignored the law or provided the educational equivalent of a cardboard cutout. Classes were crowded, resources non-existent, and teachers often as overworked as their students. It's not like they were cranking out child prodigies at the rate they were churning out bolts of cloth. Let's not forget the role of religion in this mix. The Sunday school movement, while well-intentioned, was more about teaching moral lessons than actual academics. It was a noble attempt to educate the masses, but fell short in preparing children for anything beyond the spiritual realm. Attending Sunday school was more about learning the 10 Commandments than mastering the 3 Rs. So while Victorian society patted itself on the back for its moral compass, it largely ignored the practical needs of its youngest members. This brings us to the great paradox of the Victorian era. While the age was defined by progress, it was also mired in anachronistic ideals. The notion that labor was a moral imperative was as outdated as the horse-drawn carriage. Yet it persisted, fueled by a mix of economic interests and societal norms. The reality was that many families relied on their children's earnings just to scrape by. The choice between education and survival wasn't much of a choice at all. Now, here's a zinger for you. Despite the grim outlook, reform was brewing. Activists like Richard Osler and Lord Ashley were rattling cages, pushing for changes that would eventually lead to more comprehensive child labor laws. Their efforts weren't exactly overnight successes, but they planted the seeds for a slow, painful evolution. It was a bit like turning a battleship in a bathtub, painfully slow and frustratingly difficult. In the meantime, children continued to toil, their dreams obscured by the smoke of 1,000 factories. The Victorian era was a time of stark contrast, where the promise of progress hid the grim reality of exploitation. The myth of the industrious child was a comforting lie, a way for society to sleep at night while its youngest members labored away in the daylight. So as the clock ticks and another workday begins, remember that the story of Victorian child labor isn't just about the past. It's a cautionary tale about the costs of progress, the dangers of complacency, and the importance of education. The wheels of change may turn slowly, but they do turn, and with each revolution, the world inches closer to a more enlightened age. Stay tuned, my friends, because the tale doesn't end here. The struggle for reform continues, and the next chapters will delve into the legislative battles, the champions of change, and the slow march toward a brighter future. Until then, keep your ears open and your wits about you. The Victorian era may be history, but its lessons are as relevant as ever. And so, as we dive deeper into the murky waters of Victorian child labor, let's tip our hats to the bold reformers who dared to shake things up. These were the folks who looked at the Dickensian nightmare and said, "Hang on a minute, this can't be right." Richard Osler, the so-called factory king, is a name you might not find in your average history book, but he's a real MVP of social change. This man was like the whistleblower of the 19th century, though without the convenience of social media hashtags to spread his message. Osler's weapon of choice, the pen. His letters to the Leeds Mercury in the 1830 brought the brutalities of child labor into stark relief, coining the term Yorkshire slavery. Talk about a mic drop moment. But Oslo wasn't alone in this uphill battle. Enter Lord Ashley, later known as the 7th Earl of Shaftesbury, a man whose heart beat for the underdog. He was the kind of guy who'd likely have justice tattooed on his forearm if this were modern times. Ashley spearheaded the 10 Hours Act of 1847, fighting tooth and nail to get the workday reduced to 10 hours for women and children in factories. Now, this might sound like a modest proposal, but back then it was as revolutionary as suggesting workers should have weekends off. The act was a step in the right direction, a small crack in the wall of indifference that surrounded child labor. But let's not forget the voice that echoed through the ages, Charles Dickens. This literary giant wasn't just penning novels for your high school English class to dissect. Oh no, Dickens was a social critic wrapped in the guise of a storyteller. With novels like Oliver Twist and David Copperfield, he painted vivid portraits of child laborers, orphans, and the poor, making sure the middle and upper classes couldn't just look the other way. The impact of Dickens can't be overstated. He took the grim realities of Victorian life and served them up with a side of empathy, creating characters that wormed their way into public consciousness like catchy pop lyrics. However, not everyone was thrilled with these reformers and their pesky insistence on change. Take a peek at the public reaction, and you'll find a mixed bag of support and skepticism. Some folks were horrified by the revelations, clutching their pearls and writing checks to charities. Meanwhile, others, particularly those with financial stakes in the status quo, considered these reformers a threat to their bottom line. Imagine being told that your profit margins were built on the backs of children. Not exactly a feel-good realization for the Victorian industrialist. The media played its part, too, in stirring the pot. The Illustrated London News, among others, published illustrations and stories that brought the plight of child laborers into the drawing rooms of the nation. These weren't just articles. They were emotional gut punches designed to wake people up. The juxtaposition of idyllic family life with the harshness of child labor was like a slap in the face, forcing people to confront the contradictions of their era. And here's a kicker for you. While these reformers were pushing for change, the government was often dragging its feet. The laissez-faire attitude of the time meant that many lawmakers were hesitant to impose regulations that might stifle economic growth. It's like asking a chef to go easy on the salt when everyone's raving about the soup. But the pressure was building, and change was inevitable, albeit slower than molasses in January. Let's sprinkle in some numbers for good measure. By the late 19th century, the tide was turning. The Factory Act of 1878 finally put some real teeth into legislation, prohibiting the employment of children under 10 and mandating education up to the age of 13. This was progress, but it was a bit like putting a band-aid on a gaping wound. It took years of relentless advocacy and the tireless efforts of reformers to make even these incremental changes. Now, here's a quote that'll stick with you. The world has grown too small for us to stand by and watch injustice without lifting a voice. That was from Lord Ashley, and it captures the spirit of the reform movement. These were ordinary people doing extraordinary things, pushing against the tide of indifference and inertia. But let's not kid ourselves. Change didn't happen overnight, nor was it universally welcomed. The road to reform was a rocky one, with setbacks and compromises along the way. And while the eventual legislative victories were significant, they were only the beginning of a long journey toward a more equitable society. It was as if the reformers had run a marathon in lead shoes, and just as they crossed the finish line, they realized there were still miles left to go. As the 20th century loomed on the horizon, the conversation about child labor continued, evolving with the times. The reformers had laid the groundwork, but the struggle was far from over. The Victorian era may have ended, but its lessons lingered, a reminder that progress is a journey, not a destination. So, where does that leave us? On the cusp of a new era, with the echoes of reformers and critics still resonating. The stage was set for further change, as society began to grapple with the complexities of industrialization and its human cost. The story of child labor wasn't over. It was merely evolving, and the next chapters promised to be just as compelling as the last. Stay tuned, because the saga of Victorian child labor and its reformers is a tale with many more twists and turns to come. The winds of change may be slow, but they are persistent, and the fight for justice is never truly over. Keep your eyes peeled and your history books open. There's always more to learn. So, as the Victorian era shuffled its way into history's arms, find the world struggling to mend the fractures left by industrialization's relentless march. The reformers had set the stage, but the performance was far from over. The ink on the Factory Act of 1878 was barely dry when the real work began. This act might have finally put a definitive age limit on child workers and insisted on education, but it was like celebrating a goal when the game was rigged from the start. Let's talk numbers. By the late 19th century, approximately 1.5 million children were still working in Britain. Sure, they weren't all trundling into coal mines at age 5, but the factory floors, fields, and streets still claimed many youthful hours. The act was a start, but it didn't magically whisk away the economic necessity that drove families to send their children to work. It was akin to putting a bandage on a broken leg and calling it good as new. Economic necessity was the silent puppeteer, pulling the strings of family decisions. The industrial juggernaut had carved a society where the choice between education and survival was no choice at all. The reality was stark. Education was a luxury many couldn't afford. By 1900, compulsory education laws had made strides, but it wasn't until 1918 that the school-leaving age was raised to 14. Imagine finally getting a ticket to the education train after years of watching it whiz by while you shoveled coal. And here's where the rubber meets the road. These incremental changes in education were not just about giving kids a break from the grind. They were reshaping the workforce. By arming children with literacy and numeracy, society was, albeit reluctantly, investing in a future where workers were more than just cogs in a machine. The shift was slow, like Victorian molasses, but it was happening. The long-term impact, a workforce that was increasingly skilled, versatile, and capable of pushing the Industrial Revolution into its next phase, the technological one. But let's not get too misty-eyed. The transition was far from smooth. As child labor laws became stricter, industries turned to adult workers, shifting the burden rather than eliminating it. The demand for cheap, unskilled labor didn't disappear. It just found new victims. The economic engine didn't sputter to a halt. It adapted, sometimes in ways that would make even the most stoic historian wince. So, what does this mean for us in the here and now? Fast forward to the 21st century, and child labor hasn't vanished. It's just moved house. While the shadow of Victorian factories no longer looms over Britain, the global stage tells a different story. Today, an estimated 160 million children are still engaged in labor worldwide. It's a grim echo of the past, a reminder that the lessons of history often repeat when left unheeded. And speaking of echoes, let's draw some parallels. The gig economy, with its flexible hours but lack of security, feels like a modern twist on the Victorian labor model. Sure, there are no soot-stained coal mines or deafening textile mills, but the precariousness and lack of stability are hauntingly familiar. It's the same tune, different instruments, with workers today navigating a landscape that prizes efficiency over empathy. History's got a funny way of sneaking up on us, doesn't it? The Victorian era taught us that economic growth at the expense of human dignity is a lousy trade-off. Yet, here we are, occasionally forgetting those hard-learned lessons. The fight for fair labor practices, decent wages, and the right to education isn't just a relic of the past. It's an ongoing saga. As we wrap this up, let's take a moment to reflect on what this all means. The story of Victorian child labor is a testament to human resilience and the relentless pursuit of progress. It's a cautionary tale that reminds us to balance innovation with humanity, to ensure that the march of progress doesn't trample those who can't keep pace. It's a narrative that insists we never become complacent, that we always strive for a future where work builds not just character, but also lives of dignity and possibility. So, the next time you hear the hum of industry or the clatter of keys in a bustling office, think of the children who paved the way with their toil and dreams. Their legacy is a world that's still learning, still growing, and hopefully, still striving for better. The lessons of the past aren't just history. They're the foundation upon which we build our future. And if we listen closely, the echoes of those Victorian voices might just guide us to a more compassionate and equitable world.